Yeah, we can begin now, Chair.
Thank you. Boreda, good morning. My name is Councillor Abdul Khan, and I am the chairman of this council. I can confirm that the committee officers has conducted a sound check before the start of the meeting. So I assume everyone can hear me. Can I welcome everyone to today's meeting, where we are all attending remotely. The meeting will be recorded and live streamed and will be available for viewing after the meeting. Should the live streaming fail, the meeting will continue and recording will be available through the council's website following the conclusion of the meeting. Can I remind members that translation facilities are available and to choose your language of choice? If you wish to speak, please use the raise hand functions. If you can also use the chat facilities, but please note that I may not be able to monitor the chat facilities during the meeting. All microphones will be muted. If you have indicated your intention to speak, you'll be invited to turn your microphone on. If you leave your device for any reasons, can you please ensure you are muted and that you turn your video off? Thank you, everyone. So we begin with the prayer, and it's to be offered by Councillor Peter Lewis, our past chairman. Councillor Lewis, can you please unmute yourself? Thank you.
With you on, let us pray. Merciful God, we pray for the many people who have contracted coronavirus in Conway. Bring comfort to those grieving loved ones who have died, and peace to those worried, fearful and uncertain. Let us be thankful for the vaccine and for those who administered it, with the hope that we might meet as a council in the chamber later this year. Fellow councillors, as we draw to the end of the process of finalising the budget and make decisions today for the next financial year, let us remember Jesus, our Saviour, knew the pain of hard work and long hours, both in Nazareth and in your ministry with your disciples. Renew us now in our meeting here. Help us to hear other people's points of view and to discern your will as we make decisions. Grant us vision, discernment, courage and generosity. When our meeting is over, give patience and loyalty to all who disagree, discretion about what has been discussed, and diligence to those who have to carry out what has been decided. Amen.
Thank you, Councillor Peter Lewis. Moving on to the agenda, first item is apology for absence. Sally, I have Councillor Tristan Lewis text me to say he will be joining us later. Is there any other apologies, Sally, please?
Yeah, apologies have been received from Councillors Penny Andow and Ken Stevens.
Thank you. Item 2 is to declare interest. Any members have any interest to declare, please?
Councillor Bradfield has his hand raised.
Okay, yes.
Thank you, yes. Chair, and good morning.
Good morning.
Chair, on page 106 of the report, it mentions that the council works closely with the Citizens' Advice. I'm in my 14th year with the Citizens' Advice. I might be speaking about that later, so I thought it better to declare an interest in case I got, well, just in case. I declare an interest, Chair.
It's not a personal one. The nature of interest is not a personal one.
Okay. Personal.
Any other, please? Any other members?
Shane wants to come in, Chair.
Yes, we could do with the advice from the monitoring officer. Yes, sir, Mr. Harper.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the personal interest in respect of the Citizens' Advice, could Councillor Frank elaborate on the relationship? Is it that you work with the Citizens' Advice?
Thank you. Yes, I've been a general advisor for 14 years, or nearly 14 years. I also take care of the legal section when it comes to family separation and looking after children.
Thank you, Councillor. I would advise in those circumstances, if the discussion advances to discussing specifically citizens' advice, I would suggest that you declare and depart if there's a specific conversation about citizens' advice.
Yeah. Okay, Bryn.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Aaron Wayne, please.
Yeah,
yes, same as Councillor Frank. I'm also on the board of the Citizens Advice Conwy.
Yeah, and yr un modd.
In the same, again, if there's a specific discussion about citizens' advice, I would say if that does raise, then you'd leave the room during the discussion on the item on that specific matter and join the discussion afterwards.
I think Councillor Jenkins has the same interest as he. His hand is up. Councillor James.
I have to say the same as well, the same.
Citizens' advice hefyd, dwi ry fath ag Aaron ar y bwrdd.
About citizens' advice as well. Same as Aaron.
Councillor Peter Lewis has his hand raised.
Yes. Will it be same advice for Councillor James as well, Mr. Gareth?
Yes, Chairman. Yes, Chairman.
Okay. And yes, Councillor Peter Lewis, please.
Well, I'll have to declare an interest too. I'm not sure what the interest will or discussion, but I'm a trustee of Citizens Advice Conwy, so I'll make a declaration here on the safe side.
Okay. Go on, Councillor. Yes, Mr. Gareth.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, the same would apply there as well. Thank you.
Yeah, we're all clear.
Councillor Bradfield did have his hand raised, but he's lowered it now.
Councillor Bradfield, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Chair, I'm a wee bit perplexed about this legal advice that we're getting. You're not discussing the citizens' advice. You're discussing the finances of the council and the council tax. You're not discussing. It's a comment that you work closely with the citizens' advice, but there is no details of how close you're working with the citizens' advice. So I don't see why a personal interest has never happened before in Conwy with my 8 years or 9 years. So I just query that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll bring in Mr. Gareth, but yeah, you did declare it. So yes, do you want to come in, Mr. Gareth?
Yeah. To be clear, Councillor, I don't suggest that you leave the chamber during the item. All I'm saying is, if there's a specific discussion in relation to citizens' advice and the funding of citizens' advice, in those circumstances, clearly because of the link and your interest with citizens' advice, that you should leave. But I don't suggest for a moment that you leave the item, and it's only if there is a specific discussion on citizens' advice and the funding of citizens' advice, which I presume probably is unlikely. But just to be sure of that we follow the procedure. So yeah, stay in unless it's raised, I think is my advice.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you, Mr. Gareth. Thank you.
We're clear on that. Thank you. Can we move on then, please, on item 3, minutes of the previous meeting? It's from page 4 up to page 10, and I won't be going through the page by page, but if there is any inaccuracy that members wants to raise, then please do so. Other than that, can I have a proposer and a seconder? That is it true.
Move the minutes, Mr. Chairman. Move the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Bryan and Councillor Smith, you both raised your hand. Right, on that occasion, what we're going to do is ask for a hand raise because the tick and cross, we're having hiccups on that. So can we just have a raise of hand on that occasion for please? from everyone. That's Sally, I think that's majority, and we got the virtual hand as
yeah,
well.
that's
So
fine,
yes,
Chair.
that's carried. That's carried. Thank you very much for that. Right. The next item is urgent matters. I don't have any. The item 5, to receive any announcement from the chairman and the leader. So if I can start with the announcement, members, please. Yeah, so despite the challenging times, it's business as usual here in Conwy County Borough Council. And our officers in every department have been working extremely hard throughout the pandemic. I am pleased to announce that the following awards and the recognition they received, which are the result of their hard work. And if we can start with congratulating our ERF department, who have been awarded the new ISO International Standard for Health and Safety Management, and that's for whole of the ERF. Apparently, we are the only authority in Wales to achieve this standard, with the exception of Ceredigion, who has certification for highway maintenance only. So well done all. And next one is for RSPCA Cambridge, recently awarded Regulatory and Housing Service a Gold Community Animal Welfare Footprint Award in recognition of their work with the stray dogs. And then Regulatory and Housing Service have become the first Housing First project to be awarded Welsh Government accreditation. And then the fourth one is Conwy Family Sport Models, which includes all our 5 family center, is also a finalist in the in the Building Bright Future with Children and Families category. One of our foster carer also is a nominee for the We Care Wales category in the Social Care Wales Accolades Award. Those are the recent achievements of our councils, and I must point out that it's not us praising each other. Those awards are given by the independent bodies. So well done, everyone, all the recipients. And lastly, I think it might be the last full council meeting for Mr. Andrew Kirkham before his long-awaited retirement. He had been so flexible with us. I minded to ask him if he could delay his retirement for another few years. But I think I know what the answer is going to be. I've been a councillor for nearly 17 years, and Mr. Kirkham been working since the Aberconwy days, that a few decades ago, which means he had served double the time than I have. And no, we are not partners in crime. When I first met Mr. Kirkham, he had dark hair, and he still has the dark hairs, what's left of it. And he's someone very easygoing, very friendly, and gives as good as he gets, and never shows any sign of stress under any circumstances. And I wonder what his secret is. I remember once going to his office with my wish list for Colin Bay. One of them was a multi-story car park. And his response was, "You can cross this off your list." When I asked why, his reply was, "Do you know how much each car space costs to build? 10K per car space," he told me. The figures are always in his mind, and he will tell you as it is. And I always admire for his honesty. On another occasion, a young university graduate wanted help in his career path. I was asking Mr. Kirkham for advice. His reply was, "You might relay wrong messages. Just bring him to me and I will advise him direct." So I arranged the meeting, and he was right. I would have relayed the wrong messages because everything they were discussing did go over my head. But the young man was very impressed with Mr. Kirkham's advice. The fact you went out of your way, Andrew, and helped this young man showed how kind and caring person you are towards others. And I am sure you're leaving a great team behind who will carry on the good work. I'd just like to sincerely thank you for serving this authority for so many years, which we all are indebted to you for, and all the very best for your retirement. Colleagues, after our last agenda meeting this morning, if any members or officers would like to pay their tribute to Mr. Kirkham, please could you kindly indicate by raising your virtual hand. I will then invite you to have your opportunity to either complain or compliment Mr. Kirkham's performance during his time with us. So thank you again to Mr. Kirkham. And with this, I will move on to the leader's announcement. Councillor Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. A real outstanding tribute to Mr. Kirkham. Although I do believe he may be still hanging around for the next full council meeting. I
couldn't take that risk. Yeah.
So sadly for Andrew, he may have to hear some tributes at another meeting as well. But certainly echo the words you've said there, Mr. Chairman. A couple of brief updates from my side. Firstly, in terms of the latest position with regard to the COVID-19 numbers. Last time we met as full council towards the end of January, I believe the number of cases was 110 per 100,000. Since then, cases have dropped, and today's number is 89.6 per 100,000. But there has been quite a lot of movement between the end of January and where we are now in March. And over very recent days, we've seen some fairly low numbers with an average of around 6 cases per day being reported. So I'd hope we'd see that drop come down a bit more significantly over the days ahead. And of course, with all the good work that the Health Board are delivering through the vaccine programme, that risk in terms of hospitalisation and severe illness continues to reduce. And I think we should certainly say a big thank you to Betsy Cadwallader for all their work with the armed forces, with volunteers, with our own staff as well, to make sure that vaccine is getting delivered out as quickly as possible at the moment. They're doing a fantastic job. That was in terms of announcements, Mr. Chairman, and but I also thought it'd be good to reflect just really briefly. I think it's probably a year ago this month that we had our first COVID-19 case here in Conwy, and I think over these last 12 months, I'd really just like to say a massive thank you to all the work that our staff have put in over this time. You know, from those that we see on the front line in our social care, you know, continuing to support the most vulnerable, right through to those who we see less of in the offices, who've been administrating over £60 million worth of grants to businesses, who've been making sure that our IT systems are up and running, so our residents can still get in touch and get the support that they need. These last 12 months have been an absolute shift in work that's had to be carried out, and I think our staff have risen to the challenge. And it's a bit bizarre, perhaps, doing this over Zoom, Mr. Chairman, but I think it'd be really good to give a round of applause as a way of us as members showing our thanks to all those staff and all the work they've done. So I'll give a round of applause to them. They've been fantastic. That's it from me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Sam. Councillor Julie Fallon, please.
Thanks, Chair. I echo what the leader has said there, the work and effort that's been put in by all our staff over the last 12 months. But for me, obviously, in particular, I'm going to highlight schools and the education department. They've done an exceptional job. I just wanted to come in really and just share with members how well the return of the foundation phase pupils, our youngest pupils, has gone. in our schools. It's gone incredibly well. Students are back. Families, I'm sure, are feeling relieved to have their pupils back, and I know that staff are really happy to have them there. The lateral flow testing has started amongst staff. We had our first lot on Sunday, and that's gone well. There were no positive cases from Sunday, and as we move forward, that will extend to staff in secondaries and to pupils higher than year 10. In terms of when we expect our next pupils back, we will have Key Stage 2, so the older age primary students, pupils coming back on the 15th of March. And on the same day, we'll also welcome back years 11 and 13 in secondary schools. And schools are actually working hard to cautiously bring back years 10 and 12 at that point as well. Possibly not full time, they're working on how that's going to look in terms of timetables. And then years 7, 8 and 9 will come back after the Easter break, which is on the 12th of April. So school's incredibly busy, but really looking forward to welcoming our pupils back. So that's all good news. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Julie Fallon. Councillor Gronwy-Edwards next, please.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Congratulate officers on all their hard work in bringing forward the Morva Enterprise Park down in Penman Road in the Morva. All the units have now been handed over from the contractors, Jennings, in the first phase, and we have tenants lined up for all of those units, and hopefully those licenses will be agreed by the end of this week. So excellent piece of work there to see this Enterprise Park having been developed throughout the winter, which was quite challenging at times. We had pretty inclement weather, as you know, at the end of the year, but despite that, they've been delivered, and we look forward to the next phase. There's an awful lot of interest in the second phase as well, so I'd like to thank all the officers for the work they've done in bringing that forward. We desperately need the jobs going forward. I'd just like to say there's an awful lot of interest despite the pandemic, significant amount of interest in and inquiries from people wanting to invest in Conway. So I am very hopeful for the future, and I admire the people's tenacity looking for the future. So I have great hopes that we will, when this pandemic relaxes a bit, we will look at bouncing back very quickly, I hope, especially in the Tourism Leisure Centre, which have suffered tremendously over the last 12 months, as we all know. So that's good news in itself. And touching on the grants, I'd like to echo the words that Sam said, that the NNDR team and the business team have worked tirelessly getting this money out through the door, over £60 million. There's currently 4 schemes ongoing, the NNDR grant scheme, around £7 million. The extended restriction discretionary grant, that's another 664,000. The other part of the NNDR, another 7 million, and the cultural recovery freelance phase, which is 275,000, which is been allocated and awaiting payment. So plus the announcements from the Westminster government yesterday means there will be significant pots of money again for our staff to administer, and I'd just like to thank them for all the hard work they've done in supporting our business sector and our communities. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Councillor Gronwy-Edwards. I don't have any other cabinet members putting their hand on, so I'll go to Mr. Ewan Davis, our Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. Like a couple of members have already said, I too am looking forward to a time when we can meet in person, whether that's all of us or some of us, but that'll be good. We're approaching, aren't we, 12 months since we the vast majority of office-based staff started working from home, and it feels that in some ways that time has flown by, but equally it will be very good to actually get back to meeting in person. I'd like to thank Chairman, Leader, members for your supportive comments in relation to the workforce. They've been phenomenal, and you've heard me say before, I'm really proud to be Chief Executive of Conway Council, but I've never been prouder than over the past 12 months, the collective effort that has gone in to making Conway as safe and as secure as possible. I am, though, concerned, and apologies if I sound like a broken record over this, I am concerned about burnout, whether that's individually and collectively. So I was really heartened at Finance and Resources Committee on Monday, just as an example, that the members agreed to defer some of the task and finish groups. And I think that I'm really grateful to you for that collective understanding that things will take a fair time to get back up and running when we do come out of the woods, because we are still in the woods very much on this. The levels here at the moment are as high as they were back in I think early December. So we're all looking forward to better times. But I just urge you to continue that supportive approach, members, that is accepting that we will have to defer some things, we'll have to postpone some things for the greater good and for the medium to longer term benefit of the council as a whole and the people we serve together. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan. And so if we thank you for that. If we move on to the next item, and it's item 7, pay accountability in local governments, pay policy. And that's going to be taken by Councillor Emma Layton Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Good morning, councillors. It's lovely to see you, even if it is remotely today. And I'm sure, like me, you're missing that camaraderie and jostle that being in the chamber brings for full council, as we all try to find the best space to sit. As you can see, I'm the warm-up act really for the leader this morning and his finance portfolio, and I'm bringing to you the Pay Accountability in Local Government Report, Pay Policy 2021 and 2022, and this you'll find from page 10 onwards. I'm going to take you through some of the main points really for ease. I'm not going to go through every single detail, as I'm sure you'll all have read it. But the pay policy statements need to be approved by council for each financial year and published on our website by the 31st of March. So the report before you and the attached policy, which is in Appendix A, as well as the additional appendices that you have, outline our current position. So the Localism Act 2011 requires us to develop a pay policy on all aspects of chief officer remuneration and that pertaining to the lowest paid in the authority, explaining the policy and the relationship between remuneration for chief officers and other groups. Of course, there's much legislation which we need to comply to, and key to this is the Equality Act. You'll know that as a council we introduced a revised pay and grading structure in 2019, and you'll note that this is in Appendix B. Also, I'm sure you'll note that Cabinet approved the Strategic Equality Plan 2020 to 24 on the 9th of February, and this too sets out how we'll continue to improve equality outcomes for the people of Conway and our employees, which of course is vitally important. You'll be aware from previous discussions that in November 2020, UK Parliament and Treasury brought into force the restriction of public sector exit payments regulations, and that placed a cap of £95,000 on all exit payments for local authorities and other public bodies. Thus, as a local authority, it would mean ensuring no exit payment exceeded that figure without the approval of Welsh ministers. On the 12th of February of this year, the UK government unexpectedly announced that the regulations and that exit cap be revoked. The LGA advised that Welsh ministers would need to make their position clear on the matter. At the time this report was written, then no statement had been received by Welsh Government, and thus in the interim period until the Welsh Government's own revocation of that regulation, then there is still that exit cap applying, along with the requirements to seek ministerial approval of a council recommendation for exit payments that exceed such a cap. It's therefore going to be necessary to bring an additional report to council at some point, and that will be once the position of the Welsh Government has been clarified. But for your information at this point, there are no such exit cases pending. So we're in a good place at this point, and I'll bring you another report, as I've said, when the time is right and when we've received that information. You'll see on pages 14 and 15 that the leader and I have made a joint statement of support for this report. And no doubt from reading it, you'll see that it provides transparency with regards to our approach in setting the pay of employees. I'd like to thank the commitment of our staff during the last 12 months. You'll know from what's already been said that we've been delivering essential public services and supporting those in the community most at risk. Lots and lots and lots of work has gone on behind the scenes as well, not just at front line. It's been difficult and it continues to be so. So from me, I'd really like to say a big thank you to all our staff who are doing all the things that we need them to help move this council forwards. The recommendations are on page 11, and you'll note also that they were summarised in Appendix G for ease. And I would at this point seek to move those recommendations. So that's recommendation 2.1 to 2.6. And I hope that you will consider that and pass them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And do we have a seconder for this, please? Any seconder for Councillor Nigels? Well, we came in first. Now I have a Councillor Chris Hughes. You want to speak on that? Do you want to unmute yourself, Councillor Chris?
Thank you, Chair. I start by associating myself with the comments of the Chief Executive, Councillor John Way Edwards, and Councillor Sam Rowlands this morning in terms of the massive amount of work that our staff have done and the fantastic achievements they've made. But the Labour Group has asked me to read out the following statement on their behalf. Our staff, along with local government staff across the UK, have worked tirelessly to meet the challenges of the crisis over the past 12 months. Many have been asked to undertake different roles. They've been asked to run vaccination centres and testing centres, to work with care homes and support the health service to meet its challenges, whilst also supporting the families of key workers who remain in education and to ensure that the support is delivered to businesses. We've all heard the stories of staff going above and beyond to meet the challenges in front of them today. And with this in mind, we cannot, in good conscience, vote to freeze their pay yet again. And so the Labour Group will be abstaining on today's vote on the pay policy.
Thank you, Councillor Chris. Okay, there's no other speaker, so I'd like to go to the vote. And if our committee officer, Sally, can you take...
Davis has his hand raised, Chair.
That must have been in the last few seconds. Go on, Mr. Davis. You don't have to leave it. You're not declaring interest, are you?
No. I hear Councillor Chris's comments, but just to clarify, you're not today voting on whether there will be any pay rises, etc. Negotiations in relation to pay rises for our staff take place at a national level, whether that's in Wales or across England and Wales. What you're voting on today is to accept the contents of the report. Really, it's a factual statement of the position we are in. So here Councillor Chris's issues, and thank him for his positive comments. But equally, I didn't want any members to think that that we were doing anything other than accepting the factual written report today. Thank you.
Okay. Sally, we're going to do a roll call.
Yep, so I'll read out your names. So for, against or abstain. Councillor Mark Baker.
For.
Councillor Carol Beard.
For.
Councillor Frank Bradfield.
Abstain.
Abstain. Councillor Phil Capper.
For.
Councillor Cheryl Carlisle.
For.
Councillor Chris Cater.
For.
Councillor Jeff Corrie.
For.
Councillor Brian Cossey.
For.
Councillor Sam Cotton.
For.
Councillor Mary Doyle.
For.
Councillor Goronwy Edwards.
Abide.
Councillor Keith Eales.
For.
Councillor Louise Emery.
For.
Councillor Philip Evans.
Obliged.
Councillor
For.
Julie Fallon.
For.
Councillor Pauline Heap Williams.
For.
Councillor Pat Hebron.
No.
Councillor Andrew Hinchliffe.
Dane.
Councillor Chris Hughes.
Dane.
Councillor Ronnie Hughes.
For.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor Ian Jenkins.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Gareth Jones.
Mattel.
Abstain.
Councillor Thomas Jones.
For.
Councillor Wynne Ellis Jones.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Abdul Khan.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Emma Leighton Jones.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
For.
Councillor Yvonne Lloyd.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Garfield Lewis.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Sue Lloyd Williams.
Obliged. For.
Councillor James Lusted.
Obliged. For.
Councillor Anne McCaffrey.
For.
Councillor Charlie McCoubry.
For.
Councillor Don Milne.
For.
Councillor Roger Parry.
For.
Councillor Dave Rees.
For.
Councillor Greg Robbins.
For.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Dave Roberts. Councillor Dave Roberts. No, okay. Councillor Liz Roberts.
Obliged. For.
Councillor John Roberts.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Sam Rowlands.
For.
Councillor Harry Saville.
For.
Councillor Sue Shotter.
Obliged. For.
Councillor Michael Smith.
For.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Bob Squire.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Trevor Stott. Councillor Trevor Stott? No. Okay.
Obliged.
Obliged, thank you.
For.
Councillor Adrian Tansley.
Abstain.
Councillor Joan Vaughan.
For.
Councillor Andrew Wood.
For.
And Councillor Aaron Wynne.
Obliged.
For.
Yeah, Councillor Dave Roberts, did you want to come back in? 4. Okay, thank you.
Unmute, Steve.
Oh, and sorry, I believe Councillor Tristan Lewis has also joined the meeting. So I don't know if Councillor Lewis wants to vote or did he? Obliged. Okay, diolch.
Is that for vote or not for the motion? Obliged for both, I take it. How many? So it's
do you want me to go through the numbers, Chair?
Go on. Okay, Sally.
Yeah, just bear with me a second. So we had 47 in favour, Chair, so that's carried.
That's carried. Thank you, Sally. I think our Chief Executive was mentioning something about burning out. I think our leader just did that, burn himself and Mr. Kirkham out, because all the next item is the leader is going to take. So the floor is yours, Councillor Sam Rowlands.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do fear that it's one of those concerts where the warm-up act is significantly better than the main event. So thanks, Emma, for presenting that report. So first report I'm sharing running through today is the Capital Strategy and Treasury Management Report, which starts on page 49 of the agenda pack today. Thank you again to Sandra Forrest and the team in finance for pulling this together. I'm just going to briefly go through the main points on this here. So paragraph 1.1, as it says there, this Capital Strategy and Treasury Management Report for the year ahead brings together in one report all the elements of the reporting requirements for Treasury management that need approval. That's the Capital Strategy, the Treasury Management Strategy, and the Investment Strategy. So all these items have been to the Audit and Governance Committee. They went there on 22nd of February. Who supported recommendations in the report as well. So briefly then, the capital strategy in Appendix A gives a high-level overview of how capital expenditure, capital financing, and treasury management activity contribute to the provision of our services, along with an overview of how associated risk is managed and the implications for future financial sustainability. As I say, the report also includes the treasury and investment strategies and the prudential indicators that need approval by council. The strategy complies with the investment guidance issued by Welsh Government and the SIPFA code. And so I would, Mr. Chairman, move the recommendations in paragraph 2. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for the proposal, please? Anybody's hand going up? I can't see.
Yeah, Peter Lewis's hand.
Councillor Peter Lewis and Councillor Michael Smith. So yes, thank you. And nobody wants to speak on that item. So Sally, can we do a roll call on that, please?
Yeah, Councillor Mark Baker.
4.
Councillor Carol Beard.
4.
Councillor Frank Bradfield.
4.
Councillor Phil Capper.
4.
Councillor Cheryl Carlisle.
4.
Councillor Chris Cater.
4.
Councillor Jeff Corrie.
4.
Councillor Brian Cossey.
4.
Councillor Sam Cotton.
4.
Councillor Mary Doyle.
4.
Councillor Gronwy Edwards. Councillor Gronwy Edwards. No. Councillor Keith Eales.
4.
Councillor Louise Emery.
4.
Councillor Philip Evans.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Julie Fallon.
4.
Councillor Pauline Heap Williams.
4.
Councillor Pat Hebron.
4.
Councillor Andrew Hinchliffe.
4.
Councillor Chris Hughes.
Obliged.
Councillor
4.
Ronnie Hughes.
4.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
4.
Councillor Ian Jenkins.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Gareth Jones.
Obliged.
Councillor Thomas Jones.
Obliged.
Councillor Wyn Ellis Jones.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Abdul Khan.
Obliged.
Councillor
4.
Emma Leighton Jones.
Obliged.
Councillor
4.
Peter Lewis.
4.
Councillor Tristan Lewis.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Yvonne Lloyd.
Obliged.
Councillor Garfield
4.
Lewis.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Sue Lloyd Williams.
Obliged. 4.
Councillor James Lusted.
Obliged.
Councillor Anne McCaffrey.
4.
Councillor Charlie McCoubry.
4.
Councillor Don Milne.
4.
Councillor Roger Parry.
4.
Councillor Dave Rees.
4.
Councillor Greg Robbins.
4.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Obliged. 4.
Councillor Dave Roberts. Yeah, that's a nod. Okay. Councillor Liz Roberts.
Obliged. 4.
Councillor John Roberts.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Sam Rowlands.
4.
Councillor Harry Saville.
4.
Councillor Sue Shotter.
Obliged. 4.
Councillor Michael Smith.
4.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged. 4.
Councillor Bob Squire.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Trevor Stott.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Adrian Tansley.
4.
Councillor Joan Vaughan.
4.
Councillor Andrew Wood.
4.
And Councillor Aaron Wynne.
O blaid.
4.
Yeah, Councillor Goronwy, did you want to vote? I think we missed you. You're on mute.
4. Can you hear me?
Yeah, lovely, thank you. Yeah, that's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, it's carried. Okay, if we move on to the next item, please, Leader.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So next item is the one we're all here for, which is the minimum revenue provision policy for 21-22, starting at page 78. I'll canter through this one. Again, thank you to officers for bringing this together. Just as a quick summary as to what this policy is about, paragraph 1.1 states that where a local authority funds capital expenditure by debt, by borrowing, it is a requirement that each year we set some money aside to repay that debt through a charge to the revenue accounts. That's called the minimum revenue provision, the MRP. It's a regulatory requirement that the council in advance of each year approves an MRP policy which is in line with the guidance issued by Welsh Government. 1.2 shows that the policy that's in front of us today is exactly the same as the policy we agreed last year, except for the additional paragraph in there, which is that the MRP will commence in the year following the one in which the asset becomes operational. So as a quick example, if we built a new building in May of this year, the cost of paying for that wouldn't start until the April of next year. So the payments follow the year in which the asset becomes operational. Investment properties will be regarded as becoming operational when they begin to generate revenues, as will industrial units and plots for economic regeneration, categorised as property, plant and equipment, but with similar characteristics to investment properties. So I'm not going to go through the policy in any more detail than that, Mr. Chairman, and I've moved recommendations of paragraph 2. Thank you.
Second that recommendation, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, you're on mute then. I think you were saying something.
Sorry, my apology. Councillor Nigel Smith, do you want to, you got your hand up?
Well, I was going to second the leader, but the deputy leader beat me to it, Chair.
I didn't hear him, so it's all right, you can second him. Okay, so we got 2 seconders and no speakers. So Sally, if we can go to the roll call again, please.
Yeah, so 4 against and abstain again, please. So Councillor Mark Baker.
4.
Councillor Carol Beard.
4.
Councillor Frank Bradfield.
Abstain.
Councillor Phil Capper.
4.
Councillor Cheryl Carlisle.
4.
Councillor Chris Cater.
4.
Councillor Jeff Corrie.
4.
Councillor Brian Cossey.
4.
Councillor Sam Cotton.
4.
Councillor Mary Doyle.
4.
Councillor Goronwy Edwards.
Blaid.
Councillor Keith Eales.
4.
Councillor Louise Emery.
4.
Councillor Philip Evans.
O blaid.
4.
Councillor Julie Fallon. Councillor Julie Fallon. No, I'm not sure if she's still here. Councillor Pauline Heap-Williams.
4.
Councillor Pat Hebron. Councillor Andrew Hinchliffe.
4.
Councillor Chris Hughes.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Ronnie Hughes.
4.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
4.
Councillor Ian Jenkins.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Gareth Jones.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Thomas Jones.
Obliged.
Councillor Wynne Ellis Jones.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Abdul Khan.
Blind.
4.
Councillor Emma Leighton Jones.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
4.
Councillor Tristan Lewis.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Ivor Lloyd.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Garfield Lewis.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Sue Lloyd Williams.
Obliged.
Councillor James Listed.
Obliged.
Councillor Anne McCaffrey.
4.
Councillor Charlie McCoubrey.
4.
Councillor Don Milne.
4.
Councillor Roger Parry.
4.
Councillor Dave Rees.
4.
Councillor Greg Robbins. Councillor Greg Robbins.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Austin Roberts.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Dave Roberts. Yep, hand up there, thank you. Councillor Liz Roberts.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor John Roberts.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Sam Rowlands.
4.
Councillor Harry Saville.
4.
Councillor Sue Shotter.
Obliged.
Councillor
4.
Michael Smith.
4.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Bob Squire.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Trevor Stott.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Adrian Tansley.
4.
Councillor Joan Vaughan.
4.
Councillor Andrew Wood.
4.
Councillor Aaron Wynne.
Obliged.
And
4.
can I just go back to Councillor Julie Fallon, who's rejoined?
Yes, thank you. 4.
Thank you. That's everybody 4 and 1 abstention, Chair.
Diolch.
Sorry,
You're on
Mr. Chairman.
mute, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody's muting me. No, okay, so if we can move on to item 10, please. Recommended Capital Programme 2021-2022. Councillor Sam Rowlands again, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again. So this report starts page 85, Recommended Capital Programme. Thank you again to all the team for bringing this together over recent months, in particular to Sandra again for her work in bringing the report together as well for us today. Capital Programme, so just a reminder what this is. This is the money to spend on things that we see, so buildings, roads, pavements, all that type of thing. 1.1, the report provides details of the capital business cases submitted by services for inclusion in the capital programme. Looking at the business cases, you'll note in Appendix 1 that the total need for funding is over £19 million. That doesn't mean that the total capital programme is 19 million. If I remember rightly, the programme's around 26 million. There's a number of grants in there which will fund a decent amount of the capital programme. But the remaining amount left, if all the cases are supported in full, would have been the £19 million. In terms of how do we fund that then, and what it is that needs funding, the provisional settlement, which was announced just before Christmas, and with the final settlement announced on Tuesday, we have £6.8 million to fund the capital programme from the Welsh Government. So just to be clear, at the time of writing this report, it was only the provisional settlement that was known of. So you'll see in the reports, it often refers to the provisional settlement. But just for clarity, when the final announcement was made on Tuesday, nothing changed in terms of that capital allocation. Just wanted to bring out paragraph 1.4. In recent years, this application for capital funding for schemes has exceeded the funds that are available, as it is this year as well. And to ensure a fair allocation of the available funds, the capital governance framework and the capital selection process were introduced, where capital business cases submitted were reviewed and scored against set criteria. Unfortunately, that hasn't been able to happen this year, but please be assured that it is something that was just a one-off, and certainly something which will be carrying on, or at least something similar, at least to enable that further scoring to take place of capital schemes. I'm going to jump down to paragraph 1.6, because clearly if there's a need initial need allocated or identified around 19 million pounds, and we've just got £6 and a bit million to pay for that. There's a couple of things that need to be done. First of all, the programme itself, could that be reduced? And you'll see it, paragraph 1.6, appendix 2 shows a recommended capital programme which is less than the £19 million need. So the funding required is £17.3 million. That's because some of the capital programme hasn't been supported in full from Cabinet. And therefore the need to borrow to bridge that gap of what we do have and what the identified need is would mean we need to look at unsupported borrowing of £10.455 million. So £10.5 million of borrowing. Just to be clear, this is something we've done over previous years. Indeed, that it happened last year, certainly, and in very recent years that has been taking place. And I think I'm really keen to ensure that actually, because borrowing is so cheap at the moment, and because actually in terms of supporting our economy as COVID continues and allows some additional work to be done and making sure that jobs are supported, I think we've got a really good opportunity here to invest in capital schemes which provide jobs for the building sector and for those companies that will bid in for this work as well. And many of those people live in our communities who can be supported through this programme here today. So I want to pull out paragraph 1.8 as well. As part of this report approval, it's also requested for this scheme at former Meadow Lodge for the Sub-Regional Children's Residential Assessment Unit, the Respite Centre at Brolyn Nant and the school's maintenance budget. These schemes are fully funded schemes that require no capital allocation, but they do need approval today. So just to be clear, there's a capital programme at Appendix 1, which identified the initial ask. Appendix 2 identifies what it is we're agreeing to today. And recommendations are for us to approve the opportunity to fund strategic infrastructure projects through unsupported borrowing in the sum of £10.5 million, as recommended by Cabinet. Approve the proposed capital programme in Appendix 2, and approve the additional grant-funded schemes detailed in Table 2 as well of the report. And just want to finally just comment on some of the schemes that are in here, which as members I'm sure we really value in our communities. As I said in my comments, you know, there's over £6.5 million proposed in here to improve our roads. That's from resurfacing, from filling potholes to maintaining bridges, and included in that, which I'm really pleased to see, is a £500,000 specific budget to improve those unclassified roads, which I know many rural members have raised with me directly in recent times. And I have fond memories pre-COVID of driving around some of the lanes in Councillor Eva Lloyd's ward, where there's clearly there was a need at the time to see that improvement, actually identifying those unclassified roads, such a key artery within those rural communities. There's a £500,000 additional there for those rural roads on top of the usual investment as well. There's also significant investment towards flood defence in both coastal and rural communities, and you know, it's really good again to see Tuesday in Cabinet the ability to support programme of works at Old Colwyn again, to see that flood defence work, you know, multi-million-pound investment there to prevent or seek to prevent flood risk in that part of the world, and in our rural communities as well. There's investment for flood defence. Also within this programme is finance to make sure our leisure centres are being brought up to scratch. There's nearly £500,000 there, which again helps and supports the well-being of our residents, who I'm sure after been in lockdown for a number of months may want to make use of those leisure centre facilities. I'm not looking at any members in particular in the virtual room today. And then final one we want to highlight is, we're looking to invest in our playgrounds as well. Over 90 of our playgrounds through this programme will receive investment. And again, for our children, and I can speak personally with 3 young children at home, it hasn't always been an easy time for them through this lockdown time, and actually being able to invest in playgrounds so they can actually continue to enjoy those facilities, I think is really a real good thing to do as well. So, Mr. Chairman, I would move recommendations as set out in the report. Thanks.
Thank you, Leader. Just for clarity, you're moving 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Nigel, you have your hand raised. Can you unmute yourself, please? Councillor Nigel Smith.
Yes. I want to ask the Leader about the CRIMP fund or Coastal Risk Management Programme, page 90, 3.16. This project could pay significant dividends to our county. And I'm really concerned that we may only be getting what we need through this funding. And I really feel that we should be getting above and beyond what we need to secure our coastal defences, but also to improve the amenity for our residents and visitors. I think you've only got to look at the success of the Colwyn Bay sea defence, the beach there, and the benefits that has brought to that area. And I would like to see similar enhancements in other coastal areas within the county, whether it be beaches or groins. They will improve the quality and the amenity of our coastal areas. And I just really concerned that I don't want to miss the train. I want to make sure that we nail this, Leader, and that we get the most that we can. It says in the table 1 that for the CRIMP management programme, the annual revenue costs are 291,000. If we could double that, just think what we could get if we can get the extra 85% funding from Welsh Government. We could create areas which would be beyond belief for our residents and visitors on our coastal towns. And I think, we really need to go all out and get what we can going forward. Thank you, Leader.
Thanks, Councillor Nigel.
Come back.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Councillor Nigel. I think you're exactly right to highlight that as a scheme of work. The cost of the scheme estimated in there, £59 million worth of investment into that flood defence. And I certainly agree with your sentiment around it being not just a brutal flood defence, even though that is the top priority in this. But if there are things we can do around that to enhance whilst that building work is going on, I certainly would agree with that if we're able to. I'm sure our officers, as you've noted, have in the past certainly been able to make this happen. You highlighted Colwyn Bay Beach as a great success, and I'll be supportive of schemes which enable betterment, as it were, in these areas rather than just necessarily replacing like for like. But Councillor Gregg, as a portfolio holder, can I ask Mr. Chairman, he comes in to comment as well?
He's already raised his hand. I got Councillor Brian Cossey first, please. And Councillor Gregg can come late.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. I just want some clarification from the Leader on a couple of the schemes. The first one is BC 4, Portharis reconfiguration and roof works. Now, when this came to the Finance and Resources Committee, the sum involved was 682,428. which was divided up between supported and unsupported borrowing. Now, on the schedule that we're being asked to vote on today, instead of 682,000, it suddenly dropped to 73,600. And I'd like to know, the reasons for that. And then when you look at the minutes of Cabinet, they were told that part of the 682,000 was 140,000 for internal reconfiguration. So when I came to look at Schedule 2 here, I expected to see, instead of 73,600, I expected to see 140,000, so that if Cabinet weren't going to deal with the roof, they would at least be providing the capital for the internal configuration. So I'm totally confused, really, as to how 682,000 has dropped to 73,600 without any particular explanation anywhere at all. And then if you look at item 29, BC 29, which originally was all going to be done by unsupported borrowing, all of a sudden, a supported borrowing figure of 245,400 appears. Now, that isn't a figure that Finance and Resources knew about, and as far as I can see, was not approved by Cabinet either. So I'd also like to know where that figure has come from, please. But I know where it's come from. I mean, it's the balancing item for the 6.8 million. But I'd like to know why and where the decision was made to do that. But the important one, which I think we all need to know, is the Porthaelius reconfiguration and roof works. And if we're not going to be supporting that through capital borrowing, then where is that £682,000 or less the 140,000 needed for internal refurbishment to come from, please?
Councillor Sam Rowlands.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Bryan. So in terms of that first item, BC, for the Porthaelius reconfiguration and roof works, at Cabinet, when we met as you noted, the Cabinet asked that be re-looked at because we were not comfortable that was absolutely necessary, that level of spend to deal with the issue. We understand, and so we've asked our officers to go away and look at an alternative solution, as we understand there may be a much cheaper and just as sustainable solution as what was proposed in the initial business case. I suppose it also highlighted the good work of scrutiny, because as you recollect, scrutiny weren't happy, rightfully so, that there was an identified need to spend that amount of money on that roof. And I think as Cabinet, we certainly agreed with scrutiny's view on that and asked the officers go away to seek an alternative which doesn't cost that amount of money. We understand that is ongoing, and that there is potentially an alternative which will not require that capital investment as was identified in the report. The other part, in terms of the internal works, my understanding is that the cost of that internal works is the 73,600, and that's the full cost of everything within there. So you're right that what we are doing today is seeking to support that work continues internally. The only element which is removed is the roof element. I'm not sure if anybody else in terms of officers want to comment on that, but that's the position.
But in the draft minutes of Cabinet, it mentions £140,000 is required for the internal reef configuration.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering where the 73,600 has come from.
Yeah. My understanding is that 73,000 is the amount required to deal with the internal configuration. I can see Councillor Gronwy is nodding there with the portfolio on that particular project. I may want to comment further. On BC 29, as you mentioned, the movement of supported from unsupported borrowing, as you say, is the balancing act, because monies released in the supported borrowing allows that to be from the supporting borrowing side. I don't know, Chairman, Mr. Councillor.
Yes, Councillor Gronwy is on my list next. Yeah. Are you finished, Councillor Brian?
Well, not really, no, Mr. Chairman, because shouldn't that 245,000 therefore be unallocated for the moment? Because should the estimate for repairing the roof at Porthaeris be more than anticipated, you might need that 245,000 to do that. And personally, I would prefer to see that as an unallocated sum rather than just as a balancing item on street lamp columns. But that's just me.
Yeah, well, just a comment, if you like, from me. Dropping from 600k to 73 is probably be a false economy. We'll be just patching it up and doing it again. We need to sort it once and for all. But I'll bring in Councillor Gronwy Edward in now, please. Councillor Gronwy Edward.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can understand where Brian's coming from on the difference in figures, but certainly the internal works that we are planning, if this bid is successful today, is to go ahead. It's the reconfiguration of some of the internal space and doorways and such like, and fencing to the different areas outside. That work will continue, and it is in the region of £70,000. The alternatives have been looked at into the solving the roof issues. There was the solution that I brought forward in my bid, which I supported because it was a substantial piece of work that I felt would be permanent going forward, and I was happy to sign off that bid. But the officers have now looked at and following the questions from scrutiny about the actual liability for that roof. That is being looked at by our legal department to see if there is any opportunity for funding or cost towards the repair work to the roof, whilst an alternative scheme has been worked up to be a fix that will see us in the medium to long term. So whilst I was, like yourself, would have liked to have gone for the Rolls-Royce fix, but I think it's prudent to look at alternatives at this moment.
Okay. Got Councillor Greg Robinson next. Can you also, I think if you want to touch up on Councillor Nigel Smith query as well, please. Councillor Robinson.
Yes. Sorry, just to add on to what the leader said with the crumb funding, I fully agree with Councillor Nigel's point of view that we should be showing what we can do and giving benefit to not just the actual coastal defence. However, the actual conditions of the crump funding are quite strict, and therefore that funding does only actually cover the coastal defence works in the main, and there's very little added value you can get out of that stream of funding. However, what we have done with a number of projects, and we're certainly looking at other projects moving forward, including major crump schemes, is looking at other funding streams which we can plug into them. So when a crump scheme is delivered, we do get that additional value added benefit to the community and to the area, but not necessarily through the crump funding scheme because of the conditions that are attached. So I just want to reassure him that's something we are looking at, but that particular funding stream is quite restrictive in its terms and conditions.
Okay, Councillor Nigel Smith, I take it you're happy with the response?
Well, I think, you know, when you're talking about coastal protection, a sandy beach has proved very good for Colwyn Bay coastal protection. And if areas of the county wish that, then I wish them well. And, you know, we should look at bringing it forward. from my own area, Kimmel Bay, Towey, we've asked for officers to look at groins. They seem reluctant to do that. But the introduction of, or the reintroduction, should I say, of groins will hold back the sand and the gravel that travels eastward along our coast with the longshore drift. So in the long run, it will replenish the beach level at zero cost. When you consider that, I think we spent £1.25 million building up the beach level in Kimmel Bay back in 2013. And it is now dropped to a level where it's causing concern. We're only 7 years down the line. And, you know, the beach level really only started to drop since the groins were removed in 1990. So I think the reintroduction of groins, whether they be wood or rock, would be a way forward. It would improve the amenity and also help secure the coastal defence in that area.
Okay.
Thank you
if
very
you have
much.
any other comments, you can email Greg and the team direct. Okay, can I get Councillor Anne Catherine, please?
Thanks, Chair. It's interesting. I really thank Brian for raising the issues he did, because I certainly shared his concern that there wasn't clarity about why things had changed and it wasn't immediately obvious. But just as a more general point, I would just sort of say, obviously this year, due to COVID, there hasn't been as much member input into evaluating the capital business submissions. Yes. And I think, you know, obviously that's regrettable, but, you know, we are where we are. But I think the impact of that is it does make it more difficult for us as non-cabinet members to make an informed decision here, but patently we will do and we must do. Now, the overall proposal here is actually quite audacious, I think, in scope, certainly in value and certainly potentially in cost as well. As Sam has told us, it amounts to an additional 7.3 million spend on top of our pre-existing capital commitment and sort of funding commitment spend. And I think from the calculations that I've done, from what I understand, I think if we were to agree to this 17.3 million, it will cost us each and every year for the next 40 years, another 600k of revenue spend just to fund the borrowing. I do take Sam's point that at the minute, and I say at the minute, borrowing is cheap, but the future is far from certain. And this debt obviously is going to be incurred every year for 40 years. And listening to the Chancellor yesterday, you know, I think, you know, certainly the next 10 years are going to be pretty ropey. And I think certainly continue to be ropey for local government funding, although the Chancellor is only talking about funding in England. So I think I've got a proposal here, but before that, I'd like to ask Sam a sort of question, really, and it's a bit about seeking his view, because, you know, part of the bigger picture for me here is that we're in a middle of a global pandemic when incomes of many have been significantly reduced. And the future, as I've said, of local government looks even more uncertain. And of course, I've very much caught on to Ewan's plea today that staff are just overloaded, really, and potentially burnt out. So, you know, patently, there's a lot of work involved in this capital spend, potentially of 17.3 million over the coming years. So the question is, should we look to be more cautious, less audacious in committing capital spend this year, since it's not really business as usual, particularly since some of the proposed spend, according to the report, isn't business critical, and some of it brings no economic benefit. And the detail of that is on page 97. But, you know, I don't want to highlight here specifics. It's probably, since Sam is leader and sort of cabinet member for finance, I think it would be to have his view on that. And then once I've had that view, I'd just like to make a proposal. Thanks.
Councillor Sandro.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Anne. The feedback that many businesses are providing at the moment is in terms of a stimulus would be really helpful for them and for many of the jobs that are supported through that in our area. That's one element to consider. The other element is, of course, the projects highlighted in here are things that are actually needed by our residents. Some of the more expensive things in there, like bridge maintenance. If these works are not undertaken, then simply people will not be able to travel to places they need to get to. And in terms of your first point around the borrowing, what's proposed in here is actually less than last year in terms of the borrowing, and I believe probably less than the year before that as well. So it's not unusual for us to go down this route, and we have been proven to be able to manage that effectively. From what I've understood, as you've rightly pointed out, that there is long-term economic concern, probably globally, but also in terms of the interest rates. We're being advised by our professional advisors that they expect interest rates to remain low, may even to go into negative interest rates for a long time ahead. So that immediate concern certainly isn't there. I think that it's prudent for us to invest in these works, because if we don't deal with many of these issues now, they'll probably cost more in the long run. So I think what we have in front of us is a fair, a balanced capital programme which meets the needs of our residents, whilst also being affordable for us to deliver. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Leader. Councillor Anne, you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks for that comment, Sam. I mean, I'm not quite sure it does respond to the piece about some that are not business critical and economic and have no economic benefit, but I'm happy just to leave his response where it is. The proposal I think I've got is on the back of the revealing that Brian's just done this morning. I think when this report came to Finance and Resources, we were obviously potentially committed to this significant funding for Porth Areas, which has been a bit of a real noose around our neck, really, in some respects. And if on the back of the feedback from Finance and Resources, we're obviously now restricting that and reducing it down to the figure of, was it 79,000? My proposal is that one of the concerns I've got, and we know it in the midst of COVID, is that leisure, activity, well-being, mental health, all of those are considerations that are going to have a major impact on us and how we need to support our residents going forward. So, one of the business cases here was about playgrounds. And I think we were proposing in what was in the report to underfund the ask by 200+ grand. So what I would actually like to propose here now is that the money that is actually become free, if that's the right term, from not funding the expenditure on Porth Areas, is that instead of only funding 90 playgrounds, which is, I don't know, is it 60% of our playgrounds, something like that? That we actually use the money that's available, all of the money that's now available, and put that towards making all of our playgrounds safe in all of the 5 areas across the county, because I think there's a real danger in only doing the percentage that the funding was being given allowed. And obviously some of the areas in the county would certainly be missed out. So the proposal is to make the more money available for the playgrounds is released from Porth Areas. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Anne. I'll come to those proposals later. I've got Councillor Andrew Wood waiting very patiently. Councillor Andrew Wood.
Thank you much, Chair. Again, thanks to Brian for highlighting the cases of BC29 and BC4. I'm just a bit concerned. We've just heard Councillor Gromway, portfolio holder, talk about the Rolls-Royce project of doing the whole roof for 682,000, which he signed off. And the leader saying now that we've got £73,000 worth of health and safety aspects that are in there. So basically, I think we need to take this BC4, which is the Porth Areas roof case back to scrutiny. I think it needs to go back to finance resources. I know there's a special report coming out next week, but I think we need to review that because this has got a lot of public interest in it. And I just can't see how the portfolio they can still say that it's signed off 682 and that we have no real idea of how much it's going to cost at the moment. So I'd like to see it go back to finance scrutiny, please.
That's your proposal. Okay, hold that thought. I got Councillor Charlie McCurry next, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I think it's a real shame we didn't have the business case selection this year. I think in hindsight, that was a mistake, but I can't speak for my fellow cabinet members, but the workload we've been under has been really, really, really severe. And we thought, given COVID, that was probably the best way forward. But what's always struck me, I've been on that before I joined the cabinet, was how many business cases we couldn't fund. Some really, really essential stuff that we needed doing for our residents we couldn't get done. Well, what we've got here is genuinely a good news story. There's lots of stuff's going to happen there that needs to be brought forward, but we don't fund everything. My housing team, who adapt private houses, one of 1.5 million, we were able to give them $1 million. We sit down and we consider each case on its merits. And it was absolutely clear from scrutiny that scrutiny was not happy with Porth Areas, given the legal situation around it, given the amount of money involved in it. So it was absolutely right that we said, hang on a second, let's go back to this and have another look at it. And Andrew's right, we will have to come back. We'll have to look for other solutions. But officers, it's their job to bring forward business cases for their service to say, this is what we'd like to do. We think it's really, really important. It's our job as politicians then to sit down and sift and say, what can we afford? What is absolutely essential? And I've been reassured that pausing this spend is the right thing to do. The building's not going to fall down tomorrow. This is not a problem that can't be fixed at a later date. So this is us listening to scrutiny, taking on board the views and trying to bring a balanced package here. Next item will be discussion council tax. Again, we'll probably be challenged that it's too high, but that's the nature of the job. We can't fund everything. We have to focus our money on the things that we absolutely need. And we need to look at this one again, because we have to be absolutely sure that every penny that's spent on this is spent correctly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Charlie. Councillor Harry Saville, please. Do you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've had a quick look through the items that Anne's raised, which are not business critical and do not have an economic benefit. Now, I don't know if it'd be of interest to members, but of the spending that's going on those items, 70% of that is going on items which maybe are not business critical and don't have an economic impact, but are a statutory responsibility of this authority. A lot of that money is also going on enhancing Mostyn Street, which is the county borough's premier high street. I'll be supporting this because I care about Llandudno and I care about our premier high street. Clearly, Anne doesn't.
Councillor Gronway Edwards, please.
Just am I unmuted? Thank you for letting me come back, Chairman. I was just going to talk in general about the business case, and I'm very pleased that we've been able to bring these business cases to you for your consideration and for your support, hopefully. Because in a year when we've had so many challenges and the economy certainly is on an edge as far as I'm concerned, I think we need to be positive. I think it favours the brave, and we need to show that commitment to our residents, to our business sector, that we are here for the long term and we are planning for their future recovery. And lots of the projects in here, whilst you say are not economic drivers, we also have to consider the health and well-being of our residents and the citizens that we represent. So I am very pleased that we've been able to bring these before you. Fair enough, there's one that you highlighted that's causing some concern, and we have said we will relook at that. That is quite right that we do that, I think. But certainly I'm very pleased that we have been able to support these cases as a cabinet, and I hope that members will do likewise, because certainly our residents out there expect us to be bold on their behalf. Sam and I have had many meetings over the last few months with the business sectors. They are crying out for investment to Conway is so reliant, is seen as a destination, and we are trying our best to make sure that a destination gets the right sort of resources to keep it a premier destination for people to come to and work to and live in. And this is an investment for future generations as far as I'm concerned. I would like to be seen as doing more, but we have been very mindful of having to deliver this very extensive project within the next 12 months or so. So that is partly one of the drivers behind it as well. I don't know if you were listening to the budget yesterday from Westminster, but there certainly is announcements there that Conway were included in, and I would like to thank Sam for all the work he's been doing on alternative funding that hopefully will come forward in addition to this in the very near future for schemes that we are looking at now to enhance even further the infrastructure of Conway. So I would propose this recommendation and hope that members will as well.
Thank you, Councillor Grunway. So I take it you seconding Councillor Sam's proposal.
Yeah.
Just a minor comment from me. I mean, there is 59 of us here. We have all our community's interest as well as the counties as a whole. But everybody is passionate about something. But please keep it the discussion so that we don't upset anyone. Or we don't need to fall out. We're only doing our best for everyone. But some things I might like more than others. That doesn't mean others is wrong. We're all right in our own way. And I would respectfully ask you, we be respectful to each other. Councillor Anne McCurry wants to come in again. If this time, if you want to make the proposal more concrete, then I'll seek for seconder for your.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a couple of things. I really appreciate the comment you just made, because I really don't like having to continually say not to people who tend to be from one political party, don't put words in my mouth, because patently I didn't say that I didn't care about Mostyn Street, just like I haven't said I don't care about the tramway, which is obviously one of the other areas. So, I just leave it at that, because it's not my style to be pejorative to people and to be disrespectful. I just want to, this second intervention really was just to second Councillor Andrew Wood's proposal that Porthairius needs to come back quickly to scrutiny, so that scrutiny members can actually get underneath what's actually happening with Porthairius, what needs to be done, what the funding situation is, how much of a liability it is, or how much of an asset it is. So I just want to second that. And my proposal previously was we actually increase the funding to the play parks on the back of the money being released from Porthairius. Thanks.
So before you go, are you supporting Councillor Woods and withdrawing yours, or are you withdrawing yours?
No, I am still proposing mine. So you asked me to restate it, so I have, and I'm just seconding Councillor Woods' proposal. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Woods been seconded, and I got Councillor Brian Cossey again, please. Councillor Brian Cossey, do you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I hear what Anne's saying, but if we agree Appendix 2 as it is at the moment, there is no additional capital to go into playgrounds, and there is, more worryingly, there is no spare capital then to complete whatever scheme Porthairius roof requires. The only amount for Porthairius now is 73,600, which will deal with the internals. Hence why I suggested that the 245,400, which has suddenly appeared in street lighting, should actually be there as a reserve. Because the one big thing we don't know is, yes, officers have gone off to look at different solutions for Porthairius, but eventually that will cost us something. And if we agree Appendix 2 as it is now, there is no capital funding whatsoever to repair the roof at Porthairius. Yeah? But don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm going to vote for Appendix 2, as it is. But I'm just firing the warning shot that if we're not careful, we won't have any capital funding to deal with Porthairius. And you can't give the street lighting section £245,000 and then suddenly take it back off them because we need it for the roof. But there you are.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Councillor Warren. Councillor Gareth Jones, please. You're next on the list. And then
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to sort of comment on that chief point raised there by Councillor Harry Saville. And really, my concern is certainly about Llandudno. I've lived here for so many years, but my real concern is about the amount of money paid by our taxpayers, by the council taxpayers. And we live in uncertain times. And I think we should have been listening very carefully to what Councillor Anne McCaffrey was saying in terms of a commitment of, if she's right, 400,000 in revenue. Now, because of the uncertainty, and council tax is very much an issue, not only here in Conwy, but in Welsh Government and at the UK level as well, I'm very concerned if we are committing, much as we have a wish list and important things to do, even statutory things, we do have that list. It's important that we refer to it, but it's very important that we keep an eye on our financial position and the demands we are making on our ratepayers. There will be a limit on this. And I think we should dwell on that point. I certainly will support and second what Councillor Anne is proposing. And quite frankly, for the record, it is. I mean, this business of Porth Areas is simply becoming an embarrassment. It needs to be sorted out and sorted out very, very quickly. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Councillor Greg Robinson, you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just want to refer back to the playgrounds. And I think we all agree the playgrounds are an important part of our communities. What we're proposing this year is probably one of the largest allocations we've done for playgrounds for a number of years. This will actually give us an opportunity to get works done on them. Some very few are just general repairs, but we have a task and finish group that's looking at the future of playgrounds and the future of play as a whole thing. What we've identified is a reasonable and fair budgeted amount to get our existing playgrounds operating and keep them running as they should be, and not putting a burden on a taxpayer. The results of a task and finish group, which obviously come back through democracy, will then give us a steer as to what we need to do in the future. And I think it would be remiss of us now to spend more money than we need to do to actually get our playgrounds at a reasonable level than is required. The figure is in there, reasonable. Finish group finish what they're doing, and then next year they can be revisited. I would not pay any change to what's proposed this.
Okay, our last speaker is Councillor Ronnie Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Listening to what Brian says is making common sense. I know there's got to be an investigation, and I'd like to participate in that investigation when it comes along. But if we haven't set the budget today, where are we going to go for the money? Everybody's saying, "Oh, it's a problem that we're going to have." There is no doubt about it. We're going to have a problem. But you know, we've all got to use a bit of common sense today. Things that's going on today haven't happened before in this authority. They haven't happened before in other authorities. So we've got to be a bit more flexible in our approach. And I don't believe in robbing Peter to pay Paul. You know, I don't believe that we should be saying, "Oh, we'll take this away and we'll put it in there." That's wrong. We need to sit down and talk around this. And I totally agree with Brian Cossey's gone and said. I'm just saying that it's the old chestnut with me. With the sea defence work, we're talking about 7 million. We can get round the sea defence by building the barrage. You heard yesterday what he was saying. He's looking for green projects. Well, I'd like to see this as a big green project for Conwy and Denbighshire. We have to watch out what's happening in Flintshire because they want to use Mostyn Docks as a part, and we'll be left out. And I'm asking this council today to support the barrage. Well, let's get the investigation going. Let's find out what work. If we're talking about work for kids, this is where we can get the jobs. We need to do it. And the other thing is, you can see Cromwell on the screen there, £6,000 per apprentice that they've offered. And I don't know if the Welsh Assembly are going to pick that up. But I hope we can put a team together to go around all the businesses in Conwy asking them to take apprentices on. That's what we need. We need to get out there. Don't wait for anybody to come. We go and meet the employees. Let's do it as quick as possible. But what Brian is saying about this, the problem is not going to go away. Then we'll have a discussion around September. We need 250 or 300,000. And I'm not willing to rob Peter to pay Paul when the problem's going to still be there. We've seen this before, and I think we're just digging a hole for ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Sam, you want to indicate it to come back in?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just in response to Councillor Ronnie, raised a good point there in terms of the tidal barrage. I did have the privilege of joining the North Area Forum a couple of weeks ago, actually, I think it was, with one of the members of the North Wales Tidal Energy Group, and shared at the Area Forum the latest update there. So that was really useful. Certainly support that we continue to press ahead with supporting that initiative. Just going back to this money for Porth Airias roof, the initial indications are that the cost of the alternative could be around £40,000, and that would be met within existing budgets. So in terms of looking to set aside some money to deal with this, what the initial investigations have shown that there's possibly an alternative for this, which is significantly cheaper, and I say can be met with an existing budget, so there's not a need for a specific capital allocation for this work. But I'd certainly support if members, as Councillor Andrew Wood has indicated, want to see the detail behind that, and that's exactly what Cabinet asked for as well. So we'd certainly support that and seek to get something in front of scrutiny sooner rather than later, so members can be assured that this work will be carried out in an appropriate way, but at a much more reasonable cost. Thanks, Jen.
Okay, before you go, Leader, can I ask that question then? Because I got three alternative proposals here. Are you willing to put Councillor Wood's proposal within your proposal?
Okay, so yeah, if that makes life easy in terms of managing a vote, because we'll be here all day. Yes. So if I go back to recommendations that as set out in the report, and include that an update is provided to scrutiny as to the detail behind the Porth Airias roof and what the alternative would be to deal with that, as well as Councillor Andrew outlined.
Okay, that will make life easy. Are you happy with that, Councillor Wood?
Yes, very happy.
Okay.
Thanks, Sam, for that. Yes, thank you, Chair.
Okay, is that now we got Councillor Ann's proposal seconded, also been seconded. So I'm going to take the amendment first. So Sally, can we take vote on Councillor Ann's proposal first, please?
Yes,
and we'll
no
go
problem.
for a roll call.
Yeah, no problem. I'll read out your names. So Councillor Mark Baker.
Against.
Councillor Carol Beard.
Against.
Councillor Frank Bradfield.
For.
Councillor Phil Capper.
Against.
Councillor Cheryl Carlisle.
Against.
Councillor Chris Cater.
Against.
Councillor Jeff Curry.
Against.
Councillor Brian Cossey.
Against.
Councillor Sam Cotton.
Against.
Councillor Mary Doyle.
Against.
Councillor Goronwy Edwards.
Against.
Councillor Eels.
Against.
Councillor Louise Emery.
Against.
Councillor Philip Evans.
Against.
Councillor Julie Fallon.
Against.
Councillor Pauline Heap-Williams.
Against.
Councillor Pat Hebron.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hinchliffe.
For.
Councillor Chris Hughes.
Clyde.
Councillor Ronnie Hughes.
Against.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
For. Sorry, against.
Councillor Ian Jenkins.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor David Johnson. Oh, sorry, he's not here. Councillor Gareth Jones.
Blaid.
4.
Councillor Thomas Jones.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Wyn Ellis Jones.
Blaid.
4.
Councillor Abdul Khan.
I'll abstain.
Councillor Emma Leighton Jones.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Councillor Peter Lewis.
Against.
Councillor Tristan Lewis.
O blaid.
4.
Councillor Ifor Lloyd.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Garfield Lewis.
O blaid.
4.
Councillor Sue Lloyd Williams.
O blaid.
4.
Councillor James Listed.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Anne McCaffrey.
On the basis that kids are more important than street lights, 4.
Councillor Charlie McCoubry.
Against.
Councillor Don Milne.
4.
Councillor Roger Parry.
Abstain.
Councillor Dave Rees.
Against.
Councillor Greg Robbins. Councillor Greg Robbins.
Against.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Blaid.
4.
Councillor Dave Roberts. Can anyone? Against, sorry.
Against.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Liz Roberts.
Abstain.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Abstain.
Abstain, thank you. Councillor John Roberts.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Sam Rowlands.
Against.
Councillor Harry Saville.
Against.
Councillor Sue Shotter.
Abstained.
Councillor Michael Smith.
Against.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Bob Squire.
Against.
Councillor Trevor Stott.
Yn erbyn.
Councillor Adrian Tansley.
4.
Councillor Joan Vaughan.
4.
Councillor Andrew Wood.
Abstain.
And Councillor Aaron Wynne.
O blaid.
4.
Yeah, would you like me to count up the numbers, Chair?
Yes, please.
Okay, if you just bear with me. So I had 5 abstentions, 15 for and 34 against.
Thank you very much. So the motion lost. We'll just go for the original recommendation with amendments then, please. For the clarity, if you don't mind, Sally, if we can go for a roll call again.
Yeah, can I just check we had a seconder for Councillor Sam's proposal?
Yes, it was seconded by Councillor Gronway Edward.
Okay, yeah, that's great, thank you. So this is also to include Councillor Andrew Wood's proposal?
Yes.
Okay, so Councillor Mark Baker?
4.
Councillor Carol Beard?
4.
Councillor Frank Bradfield?
4.
Councillor Philip Capper?
4.
Councillor Cheryl Carlisle?
4.
Councillor Chris Cater?
4.
Councillor Jeff Corrie?
4.
Councillor Brian Cossey? Councillor Brian Cossey?
Sorry, 4.
Thank you. Councillor Sam Cotton?
4.
Councillor Mary Doyle?
4.
Councillor Garonwy Edwards?
Blaid.
4.
Councillor Keith Eales?
4.
Councillor Louise Emery?
4.
Councillor Philip Evans?
4.
Councillor Julie Fallon?
4.
Councillor Pauline Heap Williams?
4.
Councillor Pat Hebron?
Abstain.
Councillor Andrew Hinchliffe?
Against.
Councillor Chris Hughes?
4.
Councillor Ronnie Hughes?
4.
Councillor Alan Hunter.
4.
Councillor Ian Jenkins.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Gareth Jones. Councillor Gareth Jones.
Obliged.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas Jones.
Obliged.
Councillor Wynne Ellis Jones.
4.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Abdul Khan.
I'll abstain on that one as well. Thank you.
Councillor Emma Leighton Jones.
Obliged. 4.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
4.
Councillor Tristan Lewis.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Ivor Lloyd.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Garfield Lewis.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Sue Lloyd Williams.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor James Listed.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Anne McCaffrey.
4.
Councillor Charlie McCoubry.
4.
Councillor Don Milne.
4.
Councillor Roger Parry.
4.
Councillor Dave Rees.
4.
Councillor Greg Robbins.
4.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Dave Roberts. 4. Okay. Councillor Liz Roberts.
4.
Councillor John Roberts.
Obliged.
4.
Councillor Sam Rowlands.
4.
Councillor Harry Saville.
4.
Councillor Sue Shotter.
Obliged.
Councillor
4.
Michael Smith.
4.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged.
Councillor Bob Squire.
4.
4.
Councillor Trevor Stott.
Obliged.
Councillor Adrian Tansley.
4.
Councillor Joan Vaughan.
4.
Councillor Andrew Wood.
4.
And Councillor Aaron Wynne.
Obliged.
4.
So it's 2 abstentions, 1 against, everybody else 4.
That's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Thank you so much. Okay, Councillor Sam Rowlands, you'll be pleased to know it's the last item.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure you'll be pleased to know too. I've just got a presentation that's going to be up on our screens. So just while that's loading up. Councillor Harry clearly needs to come to Abergele High Street to see Premier High Streets. I'm sure he'll make a visit when we're able to move around the county a bit further. So this last report today is the recommended budget for the year ahead, and it's the council tax and associated resolutions as well. It starts on page 100 of the report pack. Just as I said, got a few slides just to help us get through this as well, because a lot of detail within the report, and clearly it's a very important report. Before I do start going through this in more detail, certainly want to thank Andrew Kirkham for the work in pulling this together with his team of officers as well. And this will be Andrew's last budget report that he's pulled together for us as council. And I will be saying more words at a future council meeting, but certainly want to say a big thank you for all the significant efforts over this particular 12 months and in bringing this together for us in a way which helps us understand and brings us to a decision on next year's budget as well. I'm going to use Appendix 1 as the basis for the presentation this morning. It is still morning just about. But before I jump into there, just to point to the recommendations, which we'll come back to at the end of this. The first is to approve the resolutions contained within Appendix A, having approved the budget set out in Appendix 4, supported by the background report in Appendix 1. The second recommendation in report is no longer relevant. I'll come on to explain that now. Sorry, I'll come to explain that in a few moments. Second recommendation though, is to approve a contribution to or from general balances should any movement in the final settlement provide more or less resources than the provisional settlement. As I mentioned earlier, the final settlement we received on Tuesday makes no difference to this. So that second recommendation is not needed in our consideration today. So we could look at the first slide there, please, Sally. I would usually start this presentation by kind of going through the Appendix 1 in the order that it's in, but I want to jump actually to page 111 of this, which is this wider financial perspective, because we cannot look at a budget report without, of course, coming back to the 12 months we have experienced and what may lay ahead in the future as well. And the first thing, blatantly obvious thing to point out is that the significant difficulties that the global pandemic has presented to us this last year, especially, especially in terms of planning for the year ahead as well. And rightfully so, members, we instructed our officers to ensure that the first priority within this year from a financial perspective was to manage the in-year budget and to make sure that any grant support that we are able to get hold of in terms of COVID support, that actually effort and time is put into that area. So to share, you know, as a report says, up until the February point, we received over £19 million of grant support. And a lot of that is the effort of officers in putting that information together, getting that down to Welsh Government for them to review, and then for that money to come back through. There'll be questions coming back and forth around some of those claims. So additional expenditure due to COVID, loss of income due to COVID. But over £19 million has been provided to us in this last 12 months to support our in-year budget. And as members will remember, back in the summer, coming up to September, there was real concerns about our in-year position as to an expected overspend within the year. But because of all the hard work, dedication and effort being put in within this year, we've come back to a balanced position, which is a huge credit again to everyone for all the efforts that have been made. Compounding this, as a result of the pandemic, there's been a further delay to the Welsh Government budget and, of course, our final settlements as a result. And please hear me, that's not a criticism of the Welsh Government. It's purely a result of the circumstances of the pandemic, that they have been working in extremely strained circumstances as well. But as we know, we only received our final settlement on Tuesday. Prior to that, our provisional settlement a couple of days before Christmas. And the lead up to that, there was no real indication as to what that provisional settlement could be at the time. So all this is within paragraph 5.3 on page 111 of the report. And just to stick on this point for a moment, we will continue to be putting those claims in for extra spend this year due to COVID and any income loss. And I had another very helpful meeting with ministers on Friday where I raised the issue of ensuring that this support continues into the next financial year. And ministers assured me that within their budget, there's at least a 6-month window of funding to support this COVID expenditure. As I saw yesterday from the Chancellor, there's even more money going to Welsh Government, I believe £740 million extra next financial year. So again, that hasn't been allocated within their budget. So we would hope that continues to come through to us as the year progresses. The second bullet point on this page, again, is in terms of wider financial view, is coming back to our responsibility around social care. We know in normal years that responsibility and pressure is increasing, but in particular through these 12 months, there's been even more pressure, especially in our care homes. I'll pay credit to all of our care homes and our staff who provide support to those homes as well in supporting our most vulnerable residents through very difficult times. But there's also, we're expecting, and the budget will reflect this, as you'll see in a moment, expecting more pressure in social care and some acute pressures within the children's services as well. the lockdown and the impact of lockdown has had particular pressures on some of our young people and the support that they are required through social care. So that's the wider position, which I'm sure we're all aware of anyway, but I think it's sometimes worth just pointing out the obvious as a reminder of where we're at. So look at the next slide there, please. So through this this year, there have been reports shared, of course, with members on this. As I said, members instructed officers to, in terms of top priority, to ensure that within this year we're able to manage a financial position and budgets which, frankly, were potentially going all over the place because of the way in which we've had to reallocate funds and repurpose services. You know, around 300 staff furloughed. Significant changes to what we've had to do in these 12 months. But in spite of that, you know, we presented and we looked at the provisional local government settlement and revenue business cases earlier this year. After we received the provisional settlement just before Christmas from Welsh Government, as I said, there was no indication as to what the provisional settlement might be until those couple of days before Christmas. So potentially we could have looked at a report in November or beginning of December, but in all honesty, I'm not sure it would have been worth the paper it was written on, because the biggest driver of our budget, of course, is the provisional settlement, or the final settlement funding from Welsh Government. So bringing that in January, which members reviewed, and then the further reports last month, which was the draft revenue budget and council tax increase as well, which members would have seen in finance and resource scrutiny and through to cabinet as well. Prior to that, in October, with the business planning framework, which members agreed to as well. And then this time last year, it's possibly the last time we met as council in the chamber, we had the presentation of an agreement of the budget there as well. So more detail on page 110 of the report. If we look at the next slide there, through this time, whilst there's been formal reporting through the scrutiny process, member groups have continued to meet where able as well, virtually, of course. And thank you to everybody for their work through those. But also, as scrutiny continued to take place virtually as well, a reminder that every scrutiny report has a resource implication section there. So our understanding of what the challenges may be presented in the year ahead would all be highlighted in those reports as well. On top of that, officer groups have continued to meet to ensure that good planning could be taking place for the year ahead. Look at the next slide. As I said a moment ago, the biggest driver of our budget for a financial year is what money we receive from the Welsh Government. So we call it the AEF, the Aggregate External Finance. This year, the settlement from Welsh Government is for an increase to Conway's 3.6%, which is certainly welcome to see additional money coming through. The average across Wales was 3.8%, and Welsh Government decided in a final settlement to not include a floor. So some local authorities have received significantly lower settlements than ourselves. I believe 2% was the lowest, and there are those higher up the range as well. But significant number of local authorities were close to the average, with ourselves, as I say, being at 3.6% increase. The report shows in detail where this comes from and some of the drivers behind the settlement received from Welsh Government. Paragraph 6.1 shows that the AEF represents from Welsh Government the need to spend, influenced by 65 indicators. The most financially influential need indicators are population, of course, the age bandings within that, pupil numbers, and measures of deprivation. So the higher those measures are, or the higher the change in those measures are from one year to the next, would drive any increase in in the funding we receive. So that has provided in cash terms an additional £5.5 million. That's the additional money we have to spend on the services that are needed in the next financial year from the Welsh Government. So if we look at the next slide, just looking at a standstill position then, and what the meat of this presentation comes to, is that our forecast expenditure next year is £239.8 million. So that's the expenditure, the net expenditure we expect to deliver the services that our residents need. You've seen that we've had an additional £5 million from the Welsh Government, which means that our final settlement is 166.9 million. Our council tax income provides £68.7 million worth of income. So therefore our total money available is £235 million, and we have therefore a shortfall of £4.1 million. So I'm going to spend a few moments going through some of the forecast expenditure items to the question, of course, of why are we expecting there to be more money needed to be spent to support our residents than we have money to hand. One of the things I will just mention at this point in terms of the funding from Welsh Government in that AEF is that there's no provision in that funding for pay rise for our staff. So Councillor Chris raised earlier concerns from the Labour group as to there being no pay rise for staff. I'll just highlight that the Welsh Government have provided no funding at all no funding for any increase beyond what's already agreed for staff. And that's not within our, so therefore in our assumptions, as it states in paragraph 6.6, sorry, the Welsh Government made it clear within a provisional settlement and now the final settlement announcement that as no consequential funding for pay pressures have been included in the budget in respect of local government. The AEF therefore includes no funding for pay awards for 21-22 for local government. So just need to make that clear to everybody. Within here though, and we'll come on to it in a moment, our budget does not therefore include funding for pay awards other than for staff on lower pay grades, £24,000 and below. And that's because, if you remember correctly, those staff earning less than £24,000 will be getting a small pay award, as stated by the Chancellor a number of months ago. So coming back to this slide in front of us today, we have this forecast expenditure, which is higher than the amount of money we have available, even if we include the extra £5 and a bit million from the Welsh Government. So the question that we need to answer, let's say, is why is that the case? So we come on to the next slide, please. This simple graph just attempts to highlight some of the additional pressures that our services have identified that will be upon us next year. And if you look at on page 115, there's a table which shares this as well. So it depends what you prefer, a nice picture or a table. There's a couple of options as to how you want to see this. But that pressure of £4.1 million it is represented by, first of all, we've received £5.5 million in cash in one hand, but that gets chipped away slowly by these additional pressures. You'll see within schools and education, there's close to £4 million of additional pressures expected there. First significant part is a pay award for teachers that goes from September to August. So an already agreed pay award in the last financial year, which carries over to the next financial year, is going to cost £1.8 million, and we're providing that money to schools to allow them to do that. A specific pressure with regard to GOGATH which is identified in the report, which is they've seen an increase in their pupil numbers there as well. Education generally, I'm really keen to ensure that especially those children with additional learning needs are having the right level of support. So within here, we've identified actually by an extra £600,000 or so, that support at the right level can be provided to those children additionally in the next year. Education have also identified that free school meal entitlement has increased significantly. And the cost of that is nearly £640,000. To be clear on that item, some of that may be an increase in the number of children entitled to the free school meal, but the majority of that cost is actually children who were already entitled to it, who are now actually claiming it. And we saw that shift through the direct payments route when that started towards the start of the pandemic. Social care have identified, as I mentioned a moment ago, pressures of over £3 million next year. This is being driven through a number of areas. One of the most significant is the increase in the national living wage, which I think we would agree is a good thing. So in terms of that question mark around pay, we are supporting that increase in pay for the national living wage for those workers. And that's going to cost around £3 million. But we're also seeing in social services that increase in demand, let's say in particular around children's services, but also in adult social care as well. The graph in front of us shows some smaller areas of pressure next year. But just in those two areas alone, schools, education, and social services as two distinct areas that we provide service for, that's over £7 million worth of pressure next year. So whilst it's welcome to have £5.5 million extra from the Welsh Government, that still does not even cover just those two areas of spend that we expect pressure in next year. And that is why we have to look at other ways to fund those additional pressures. It's worth just pointing out, within our pressures next year, we have things like the North Wales Fire and Rescue Authority. So we have no, we can't veto that. It's a levy against us as a local authority. So when they say they're going to increase in cost in their area, they expect us to cover that directly. And that's £225,000, which I'm sure we'd want to support that. But just to highlight that, a number of these pressures aren't necessarily within our gift to control. In fact, the vast majority are outside of our control from one year to the next. So that's where our pressures are coming from. I'm not going to go through those one by one, but that's there. So if we come back onto the next slide again. So just a repeat of the previous, just as a reminder, that we've got this additional expenditure expected, supported in part by the Welsh Government funding, but not in full. And that's why we have this shortfall of £4.1 million. So I come to this point most years I have been doing this, and I then highlight how do we deal with this £4.1 million gap in our funding. So if we look at the next slide, please. In simple terms, there's three ways, as a reminder, there's three ways to deal with any financial problem. First is spend less. The second is to increase your income, and we have the ability to do that directly through tax revenue. And the third is to look at any reserves or balances that we might hold to support the budget as well. So I'll go through these one by one and share what is being proposed we do to meet this funding challenge. So the next slide talks about what's been proposed in terms of budget reductions to support this funding gap. And the first thing to highlight, this is, if you follow the report, we're on page 116 and fill into page 117 as well. The past 8 years, our services have delivered over £65 million worth of savings. That's a huge amount of savings. Interestingly, that's a very similar amount to what the council tax provides us as a local authority every year. So you could word it another way. You could say, if we hadn't have taken these decisions over the last 8 years and delivered these savings, the council tax would be double what it is today. So by taking these decisions over the last 8 years, we've managed to halve that cost on council tax payers. Now, we may not always feel that in our pockets, but that's the reality. If these savings hadn't been delivered in the last 8 years, and rather than paying, I'm not sure whether people pay £150 or £200 a month at the moment, that'd be close to £300 or £400 a month. So I do want to recognise the work, not just in administration I've been leading.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, you okay? Yeah. Sorry, I just want to recognise the...
yes, thank you.
All right, good. I just want to recognise the work that not just my administration is and has been doing, but previous administrations in delivering these savings as well. In terms of, so I think someone just knocked at my door. Is somebody there? No, not too sure. Okay. Just going back
probably it's just we're having a slight technical hitch here, so that's probably gone to the wrong door.
All right, no problem at all.
Carry on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So go back onto this slide here. So in terms of the year ahead of us, we've got a savings proposed for the financial year ahead of just over £2 million to support this funding gap. We're keen that schools are protected. It's worth again highlighting over the last 8 years, schools have contributed directly to this to the savings. This year, we've said that we're not going to ask them for any specific savings. We recognise the pressures that many of them are under, and want to continue to support them in delivering the education that our children need, and certainly expect that their work is probably going to continue to increase as children return back to school and need perhaps additional support to bring them back up to speed for the time that may be missed over the last 12 months. A reduction in savings to be found from social care, 2% across our other services, and £500,000 to be delivered from non-service budgets, which would include things like capital financing and our council tax reduction levels as well. So some of this funding gap is to be met through savings. I am very conscious that our services are going to continue to be stretched over this next year. This pandemic, whilst we're seeing some great light at the end of the tunnel, I sometimes worry it's somebody with a torch walking towards me carrying more bad news, but there is some hope here. There is a way out of what we're doing, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are moments of difficulty to continue the next 12 months. And I want us to still have some breathing space in our services to be able to deliver what it is it needs to deliver for our residents. We'll come to the next slide then. So we're still a little bit short because this can provide £2 million worth of savings. The next question then is, can we bridge this gap through some council tax support? So as a reminder, we have around 55,000 properties, dwellings in Conway, which are subject to council tax. 21,000 of those receive a 25% discount because there's one person living there. And then around 10,500 households are in receipt of and are supported by the council tax reduction scheme. As a reminder, the council tax reduction scheme is there to support those people who need it most, those people who would find it most difficult to pay their council tax due to their circumstances or due to their health. They will not be able to pay, so they are supported through the council tax reduction scheme. The proposal in this report is for council tax to increase by 2.95%. I'll come to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. To compare our council tax proposal with our neighbouring authorities again, which is useful to do in terms of context. Our nearest and dearest, not meant to be a pun, but our nearest and dearest in terms of our neighbours still charge more for their council tax for a Band D property, which is the usual measure than we do. So I think in terms of equity across, we're not a million miles away from our neighbours, but we aren't charging the same amount for what would be very similar services, if not better services, here in Conway for our residents. So we'll go on to the next slide. As I said, the proposal is for 2.95% council tax increase. This is probably one of the lowest council tax increases that we have proposed for a very long time. I can't remember it being at that level since I was a councillor in 2008. But it also reflects, I think, an understanding that many people in our communities may be struggling financially, and that's part of the reason why a lower council tax rise is proposed, to recognise that for some people this is a difficult time for their finances. So in terms of what this means in real life, for a Band D property, the increase would be £39 per year, or 76 pence per week. For those people living on their own, that is a lesser increase at £29 per year, or 57 pence per week. That additional council tax will enable us to deliver those increased pressures that I identified earlier. So ensuring our schools are properly supported and funded, ensuring that our education support services for the schools is properly funded as well, ensuring our social care services are properly funded and maintained, and actually enabled to deal with the increased pressures that we're likely to see next year as well. If you're in a lower band, of course, those prices or those costs decrease. In a higher band, those costs will be slightly higher. So that's the proposal in terms of bridging the gap. A 2.95% increase would provide an extra £2 million, which fully bridges the gap between what we had in terms of a funding requirement for next year. So the final area we could explore, but I'm not going to touch on this too much. We look at the next slide. Are our reserves. The detail around our reserves are through the report, page 119 to 121. It's been well documented over a number of years that we have some of the lowest reserves in the country. So this proposal does not propose to touch any of those reserves, but to maintain them at the level they are. And I would also hope that we may be able to see some additional one-off grant funding perhaps come through from Welsh Government over these closing few weeks before the end of the financial year. And in fact, I'd hope that we may be able to, if that one-off funding does come through, may be able to support some of our reserves to further than they are today. But in terms of meeting a balanced budget for next year, we do not need to touch these reserves, so we will not do so. And that's in line with what we did last year as well. Paragraph 11.9 also highlights that with very strong advice from our strategic director that the council does not use revenue reserves and balances to support the budget. So I'm sure we'd want to heed that advice. So I'll just start wrapping this up now. We'll come to the next slide, please. This is a slightly expanded version of what I shared earlier. We had a problem, a £4.2 million funding gap, driven through additional pressures, which I've highlighted to us, partly supported by additional money from the Welsh Government, but not enough. So in terms of bridging that gap, we'd have savings that deliver £2.2 million, a council tax shortfall, council tax contribution of £2 million, and therefore we do not any longer have a funding shortfall. So it presents a balanced budget by moving ahead of those proposals. Before I move away from this slide, I need to make sure that we're aware of the risks within this budget, and the risks are long and it's somewhat sometimes worrying, but we need to be aware that those risks are known. Many of them are known, some are unknown. I don't want to get into known unknowns and all that, but the risks are highlighted in the report for us to be aware of. I believe that this budget properly helps to manage those risks and is cognizant of those risks. And also just want to come back to a conclusion of page 125. And I'll read the paragraph at 14.1, which says there's no doubt that the circumstances surrounding the planning for the financial year ahead of us have been the most challenging since the inception of Conwy in 1996, mainly caused by the financial pressures and uncertainties that we face as a consequence of the ongoing pandemic. Quite a short sentence, but I think really important one for us to reflect on, and reminds us that as we work together as members, working with our officers, listening to our residents, and ensuring that their needs are met, we've got through, nearly got through what, as described there, the most difficult year, certainly in many respects, but certainly from a financial point of view, this local authorities has experienced, and we've nearly got there. So really be really encouraged by that we have a strong team of officers who can guide us and support us in this, and also a strong membership which is looking to deliver what it is our residents need. So the final slide, I pulled this presentation together a bit too eagerly, perhaps. So that second recommendation does not need to be there any longer. Say the final settlement has been delivered and there's no change. So I would move, Chair, that we approve the resolutions contained within Appendix A, having approved the budget set out in Appendix 4, supported by the background report in Appendix 1. To be clear, that includes a council tax rise of 2.95%, and the savings identified within the report and the business cases identified in the report as well. And I'll pause there. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. We can probably pull that slide down now.
Thank you, Mr. Leader. So what we can now ignore 2.2. Yeah, so the recommendation is for 2.1 only. Okay, I have Councillor Gareth Jones, please. You want to speak on that?
Yeah, well, diolch yn fawr, Cadeirydd.
Thank you, Chair.
Sam, thank you very much indeed for that presentation. And I do respect all the work and effort that's gone into this, not only from yourself and the financial team, from the cabinet members as well, and in the way you presented that so clearly to us. You know, I am very grateful indeed. I'm sure I speak on behalf, certainly, of the Allied Independents and all elected members. And we appreciate, of course, it has been and still is a very challenging time as far as getting any sort of sense into financial situations and getting the right balance. So I do appreciate, you know, all the work done and your excellent presentation, if I may say so. There's also been reference made to Andrew Kirkham's impending departure, Chair. If I could just say, during my time, not only as leader for a couple of years, but also as an elected member and a former holder of the finance portfolio, I am fully aware of the attributes of this man. I'm very grateful to Andrew, actually, for his friendship, certainly over the years, for his patience, for all the guidance he gave me, and also for being such a stalwart in terms of Conwy as a local authority. I mean that absolutely sincerely, and obviously there will be another opportunity to thank him, I'm sure. But in view of this agenda item today, I think I did, you know, it was incumbent upon me just to say a few words in that respect. Thank you, Andrew. Diolch yn fawr iawn for all the good work you've done. And I'm sure you'll be looking forward to your retirement. So I have no qualms with the pianist whatsoever. I think he's remarkable at his work, but I do have a problem with the tune that he's being forced to play, and in my opinion, being forced to play like this authority by others. In pre-COVID times, a 2.95% council tax increase would seem quite reasonable. But mid-pandemic, families have come under significant financial strain. And it seems insensitive to ask families to dig deeper now to find money that they can't afford. I would urge my fellow councillors to show compassion and empathy and reject this proposed increase. And, you know, just as senior Tory MPs are seeking a freeze on taxation at UK level, regardless of what happened yesterday, there is an even more compelling case to be made for a freeze on this regressive council tax. And I'm not alone when I'm requesting and seeking that freeze. It was said by the leader of the opposition yesterday in the House of Commons. It's been the subject of debate and a request made by the members of the Senedd, of the Conservative Party, and Plaid Cymru for that matter, seeking a freeze because these times are so difficult for our residents. Now, this is a local tax, and it's a pernicious one. I've said this before. It's a local tax. It's disproportionate in terms of the way it impacts on people on fixed or lower incomes, and in these times especially. Increasing council tax is simply taxation by the back door. And it's unfair, and it's an unfair substitute really for income tax. In all conscience, Allied Independents today certainly will not be voting for this 2.95% increase. And in case, you know, somebody might want to come back at me as to what I was doing about this when I was leader, my feeling is, and Sam on 2 or 3 occasions in his presentations, his words were, we've not been properly funded by Welsh Government, not enough from Welsh Government. And, you know, the role of Welsh Government is to properly fund services. And that's the role of the UK government as well, for that matter. We all know about the devolution process. But the fact is, they aren't, the main governments or the upper echelons are unprepared to take this on. Because what they do, when they impose policies upon us, rather than turning to income tax, which is an unpopular tax, but it's a fair tax, instead of raising income tax, they push and shove everything onto the council taxpayer. That's what's happening. And I have to tell you, I challenged, when I was leader, the Minister for Local Government twice on this one. And I told her specifically, and you know, I said this at full council, at the WLGA, that we are doing their dirty work for them. Because, quite frankly, if there are policies that need funding, it's up to Welsh Government in terms of social services and education. And we know from yesterday that that is yet to be faced by the UK government, that deficit with social services. So we're doing our best, but instead of increasing income tax, let's say, and just for the factual information, as it were, to increase income tax by 1% in Wales would bring in 200 million, 2%, 400 million. That would wipe out the increase demanded of our council taxpayers. But rather than that, they shy away. And the local government minister's response to me on 2 occasions was, it's in our manifesto. We can't increase income tax. Well, COVID-19 wasn't in anybody's manifesto either, but it's with us. And these are different, strange times, and they need people with leadership and ideas to come forward. I think it's unfair. Council tax should be for the people, for proper services, admittedly, and possibly rising with inflation. But over the years, we've had taxation, council tax, imposed upon us simply because of the gap, that deficit, that the Welsh Government, in turn from UK government, will not allow sufficient funding for our services. And I would appeal to Sam. I would ask him, that's a very important message. Take it forward, Sam, on behalf, not of myself, but all ratepayers who feel this is a regressive tax. It's unfair and it needs proper addressing in terms of how it compares with income tax. So I hope I made my case clear. This isn't in any way a grudge from a sort of a dump leader or anything like that. My concern is about the fairness of it all and the unfairness as far as the taxpayers are concerned. And we are perpetuating this. If we do it year in, year out, or the council taxpayer will fork out. It's about time we got real, because the situation out there today is dire for many, many families, and they're coming up against a very, very difficult time. They've gone, many of them, through distressing times and still are. So on that basis, Chair, I will not be supporting this council tax increase. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you, Councillor Jones. I got a number of speakers wants to speak, but I will urge you, if you, normally the rule is if you don't agree with the proposal, then if you have any alternative budget, then do present it, please. On that, I will bring Councillor Julie Fallon next.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think it's really important to thank all of the departments that have worked hard to have this budget in front of you today, whilst they have been dealing with what the leader said was one of the most challenging years that Conway Council has ever seen. So that in itself, I think we need to be thankful for. In terms of what has been put in front of you today, and in terms of the council tax increase, I think a 2.95% increase is fair. I've been a councillor here for a number of years. As the leader has said, this is the lowest increase that we've seen, certainly in his time and in my time too. And what I would say is just, you know, talking to people out there and knowing certainly my community in the way that I do, in terms of an increase of, for families, 76 pence per week, if we take the Band D into account, or for those who live alone, 57 pence a week. When you look at what that's actually going to support, and I appreciate, Gareth, that you're making a point in terms of nationally, and that's something that you can continue to do yourself politically, but we are where we are. So in terms of what we have here, the council tax increase, 76 pence a week, or as I say, 57 pence a week for a lone family, just in terms of education, as has been said, this is helping our most vulnerable pupils, our new ASD schools, to ensure that we continue to provide excellent education for our pupils at Ysgol y Gargath, which they have done and want to continue to do so. Free school meals, as the leader has said, we've seen a large increase in the number of people who have applied for free school meals, and equally those who were already eligible. The uptake has increased. That's a good thing, but again, these are our vulnerable families that we're supporting. And I just think if people out there understood, and I know that people I've had the conversations with would be happy to pay 76 pence per week extra to support our most vulnerable people. And I think that's the way that we have to look at it. And I, for one, am proud of what's been put forward today. Everything we've heard in terms of the capital business cases, everything really is about trying to support some of our most vulnerable members of society and what we can do to make things better, and balance that with a 2.95% increase, the lowest that we've seen for, well, certainly, as I said before, in my time. I'm proud to support it, and I'm happy to second the leaders.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jill. Councillor Chris Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by highlighting the point that Councillor Sam made and reminding Councillor Sam that it was actually the UK Chancellor who announced the pay freeze in December of 2020 and who reiterated that again yesterday in his budget speech. And of course, it was the UK government that made no financial provision for either the Scottish government, the Welsh Assembly, or the Irish Assembly to provide a pay rise. That said, it is down to local negotiation, and Conway could give its staff a pay rise if it chose to. So I wasn't going to be political. We've deliberately avoided being political in our original statement today.
Can I bring you back to this budget, please?
I think I need to make the point that yesterday it was announced that Scotland will receive 1.2 billion in extra funding. Northern Ireland will receive 410 million in extra funding, and Wales 740 million in extra funding. Per head of population, Wales will get less than either of the other two devolved assemblies. And that needs to be highlighted, because yet again, Wales is being the poor relation where this government is concerned. Coming back to the issues that Councillor Gareth raised, I think is absolutely right in the vast majority of cases. And I know from the conversations that I've had with residents, this is an exceptional year. You know, in normal years, people would understand that there needs to be at least inflationary increases in council tax to ensure that we're able to continue to deliver our services. But this year, everybody is suffering, and as was said yesterday, you know, and it's not just my party in Westminster that said it, but other parties in Cardiff have said it, that we should not be looking to increase the council tax and impose an increase on residents. And if Councillor Gareth wanted to make a recommendation to that effect, I'd be happy to second it.
Chair, I will make a recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Michael Smith, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Sam, for the report today, and thanks for all those involved in delivering this balanced budget. So today, your job was to deliver a balanced budget, and that is what you've done for us, councillors and members here attending today. A 2.9% increase is very fair, so I agree with Councillor Fallon there. And I would have even supported a bigger increase to get a balanced budget that didn't eat into our very small reserves and didn't ask our schools for further budget reductions. So it has already been seconded, but I am pleased to support this budget. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Councillor Mike. Councillor Grunway-Edwards, please. Councillor Grunway-Edwards, you're next on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I also will support the budget, and I've heard the words from Councillor Gareth and from Councillor Chris about the alternatives, but I'm a realist, and we are where we are. Yes, we could have more money off the Welsh Government. We've tried our best, and we keep on trying our best to squeeze every penny we can out for the people of Conway, but we are where we are. I'm not going to play politics. I've been an independent all my life, and I intend to stay as an independent. Now, if you want to do that with this budget, carry on. But I'm here to deliver the services for the people of Conway. That's where I see my role. And if you can come up with an alternative way of maintaining these services with a lower council tax, please bring it forward, because I certainly cannot think of different ways. I'm just so grateful that we're in this position because of the hard work that Andrew, as well as Sam, has done with all his officers in keeping our financial position where we are. We've had so much abnormal costs this year because of COVID, so much additional expenditure, great loss of income. But Andrew, fair play to him, has looked at every opportunity to reclaim monies wherever we could from wherever he can. And it's because of all that hard work that we're able to present this budget in the way it is. And I would fully support this budget. If you can, as I say, if you can come up with an alternative, put it on the table. Let's hear it.
Thank you, Councillor Grunway. Councillor Nigel Smith, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, interesting. Fairness. Councillor Gareth talks about fairness. Well, you know, since I've been a councillor, it hasn't been fair. And I want to commend the leader, the cabinet, Andrew Kirkham, our retiring financial director, our officers, our managers, our staff, they have brought forward savings every year since I've been a councillor. And it is absolutely amazing how we managed to keep the cogs of Conway County Borough Council turning. This year, we face additional challenges, and that is recognised in this budget, not just ourselves, but our residents. And I think a 2.95% increase is fair to all. It gives additional funding to education, helps support social services, and our other departments, unfortunately, having to bring in the big savings, but you can't have your cake and eat it all the time. So, yeah, I fully support this budget, and I want to thank again the leader, the financial director, and our teams of officers for bringing forward this budget. It's good news for our residents, and it's good news for Conway County Borough Council. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Nigel. Thank you very much. Councillor Brian Cossin next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is always an interesting meeting every year, isn't it? You know, year on year, and all the months before we have this meeting, reports come to us on the current financial situation, on the financial situation as it will be for the future year. And surprisingly, in those meetings, nobody ever mentions anything about freezing council tax or having a lower council tax or anything. It's always at this meeting. Yeah, and Councillor Chris and Councillor Gareth's arguments, they put them forward before. I mean, Gareth has said himself, he's been to the finance minister asking for additional funds. It makes no difference. As Gronwy said, you know, we've got to live in the real world. This is where we are. We can jump up and down as much as we like to Welsh Office of Ministers, and we know full well that we will not get fully funded for all the services that we provide. Not forgetting, of course, that every penny that we spend from wherever it comes is taxpayers' money. The money that we get from Welsh Government has come to them through taxpayers. And it's so interesting that, you know, they're talking about freezes on the budget. So that will mean that they don't want 2.3 million to go extra to go to schools, that they don't want 1.7 million to go into education services, that they want schools to suffer further cuts, and that, you know, and that they want social services to have budget cuts instead of additional money as well. You know, it's time we got real. You know, we're here. We have to set a balanced budget. You know, Councillor Sam has put forward a very cogent argument as to how we get around the funding for next year, and that includes what is, you know, in my view, a relatively small increase in council tax, certainly less than we've done in previous years. And yes, we know that we're in a strange situation with COVID. You know, we don't all live in cupboards. We live in the real world as well. You know, we're all scared of COVID. We know people who've died of it. We know people who are suffering financially, because they've either lost their job or they're furloughed at a reduced rate of income. Yeah, so I just wish,
frozen.
I just wished when we came to this meeting every year that people would just get real and see the consequences of their ridiculous arguments. You know, we should be fully supporting this so that our schools, where our school children have been suffering over the last 12 months, there will be additional resources going into those schools. There will be additional resources going into social services. That's the reality of this 2.95% increase, not some airy-fairy argument over having meetings with Welsh Government. Get real, vote for the increase.
Councillor Charlie McCurry, next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and keep it brief. I think Councillor Bryan's covered a lot of the areas I was going to discuss. I do agree with Gareth that council tax is a regressive tax, but last time I looked, this wasn't an agenda item today. We're here to approve a balanced budget. Councillor Sam has done an excellent job of spelling out where our pressures are. I don't know whether it's a climatic thing, but there's no money trees growing in Conway. We have a fixed budget that we have to spend, and we have costs that are there. So our choices are quite stark. We as a cabinet took the position that we thought our education departments needed really, really strong support, and our social services. Our kids have really suffered over this year. I'm a parent of two. A lot of us are school governors. And if you're seriously suggesting that we should make further cuts to schools and to social services, then as an ex-head teacher, I really don't understand that. Councillor Chris has asked for more spending on wages, which again, people deserve a fair pay. That's more spending. Councillor Rand's concerned about is not spending more money on our playgrounds. So we have to make hard decisions. We have a fixed budget, fixed costs. We either cut services or we increase our council tax. And I always take as a rule of thumb, if I can stand in the pub when eventually we're allowed in the pub and explain and justify to the chap in the pub why it was 2.95%, I can hold my head up high and say every penny's gone to our schools to rebuild, re-educate our children, get them back on track. And it'll be the most vulnerable children, not the children who can afford tutors and online this and online the other and got educated parents. It'll be our most vulnerable children who need this support. So I'm frankly surprised at the attitude that we should not support that and we should make further cuts to our services. So I'd urge members just to stop the politicking. Our residents deserve better. We just need to crack on and vote and get it back on their jobs. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Anne McCaffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. Strong views here this afternoon. And I hope people don't get intimidated by some of the encouragement to actually just stop politicking, whatever that means. Presumably it's about expressing your view. I'm not going to be politicking here. And I really appreciate hearing people's views. My sort of starting point, though, and you won't be surprised what I'm going to say, is that I don't understand why we don't ask residents what they think, because they have strong views and it's them that's going to have to pay this sort of increase. So that's my opening statement. But really, I want to take us to paragraph 9.4 within the report. And that is about education. I mean, Charlie's talked very assertively about the concerns about education, and I share them and probably share them even just as strongly, if not more so. I'm really concerned about the impact of the last 12 months on our learners and school teams. And I'm concerned about the lack of sufficient resources available to support them this year, not just because of COVID, and obviously we've talked about that exhaustively today, but what we haven't talked today, the elephant in the room for schools, is a new curriculum that in theory they're also working towards, as well as trying to catch up and look after and have well-being, because there's a new curriculum which starts in just over sort of 12 months, and that brings a whole load of more challenges and need for resources. Now, obviously, we're all, majority of us are school governors, and every school is different. We've heard that the council's got a funding shortfall, but despite SAMs and cabinets, it would appear as best efforts, there are schools that have got funding shortfalls, just like council. So my one question here today is, against this backdrop, in the report we hear that Conway's had a 3.6% increase from Welsh Government, and obviously concerned about the average increase is 3.8 across Wales. So a bit of, why aren't we getting more? And obviously that's always the case, and I support that. But schools have been told they're only getting a 3.1% increase. That's been confirmed by Dr. Lowry Brown. And I don't understand why, given the words within the report, that the reality, get real, I've heard a few times today, that is that there's only a 3.1% increase of the 3.6 being passed on to schools, and that's the coalface. That's where the learners are. That's where the learning has to take place. So I just don't understand, and would ask for somebody, whether it's Julie or whoever, to give me an explanation of why is there a discrepancy, 3.1 as opposed to 3.6.
Thank you. And any response for anybody from Councillor Anne?
Can I respond to Mr. Chairman?
Sure.
Thanks for that. So what needs to be considered is what it takes to educate a child, and you're right. Clearly, schools do a huge amount there, but our education services do as well. So within the report, clearly there's additional money to schools, mainly to support their already agreed pay rises, but there is also as I highlighted, significant funding to support schools through education services. And the business cases are in a report on page 130. Oh, sorry, let's get the right page. Yeah, 134. So the business case, and they got a hub replacement program, which will support schools with their online lessons and providing tuition through digital means as well. We've got the rural business manager provision as a business case there as well. We've got additional money to support those children who would ordinarily be placed out of county, because I'm sure we'd all agree it's better that actually we can keep as many of those children in county as possible. So whilst that money might not necessarily go direct to a school, it certainly supports schools and supports the education of our children, which is extremely important. Already mentioned the free school meals, which is £640,000, which will support our children as well. Home to school transport, we want to make sure our children can get to the school in the first place so they can get the education. So yeah, a huge amount of money there to make sure that takes place in a safe way. And additional money to support those children on the autism spectrum, because again, that's not necessarily provided directly to the schools, but will certainly support our schools in educating those children in the best way possible. And then specifically Ysgol Gogarth, I'm sure we'd all agree that Ysgol Gogarth has and continues to provide an excellent service for our children. So there's additional money specifically for Ysgol Gogarth there, which will help them. And that in turn supports our mainstream schools. If Gogarth can do a good job or a better job, even though they're doing an excellent job already, that will in turn support our schools. So I don't think it's quite as black and white as equating a 3.1% increase to schools and a 3.6% increase to the council, because what we're doing is providing a package of support around schools as well to help them be more sustainable. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor,
I'm not sure I quite understand the answers.
Yeah, Chair,
can I not come back, Chair?
Can I come in?
Quickly, please. Does Councillor Julie wants to answer part of the question? Go on then, Councillor.
Yeah, just to add to what the leader has said there, that yes, the 3.1% increase is the increase to the ISB, and then as the leader has pointed out there, there's all the additional support that we are putting into our schools, in particular around those with additional learning needs. But add to that as well, there's grant funding. We're still waiting to have clarification onto exactly how much that's going to be. And I know the parameters have expanded in terms of the PDG grant to include those who are somewhat excluded in terms of IT equipment. And I think there'll be further expansions on that. But also, I put directly to Kirsty Williams a fortnight ago around additional funding for pupils in terms of, don't like to use the word catch up, but support for pupils as they return to school, and ask that it not be a short-term fix, but it actually be over an extended length of time, and not even medium-term, but probably long-term. And she agreed to that, and we're just waiting to find out exactly how much that's going to be. And we're also expecting, hopefully, that there will be some form of grant funding in terms of the new curriculum, as you highlighted there, that's coming up next year. And so we're in a good position. There's funding coming through. And, you know, in terms of all the years that I've been here, this is the most comfortable I've ever felt with a budget in terms of the zero to schools. And I will be meeting with David Jones from Education Finance and Lowry to go through some of the schools who are finding things a little bit difficult at the minute, so that we can look at what support can be offered to them. So that is in hand, and that's happening.
Thank you, Councillor Julie. Yes, so I got quite a few wants to speak. Just quickly, please. Yes, please, Councillor.
Yeah. Thanks for that additional information, Julie, because that's really important, and I really do appreciate it. I suppose I can't get my head around why we're not passing over the totality of the 0.5 that we're obviously deploying elsewhere. I understand that we've got a central education team, and I think perhaps going forward, maybe a recommendation is for transparency, both for schools and school teams as well as yourselves, and indeed chairs of governors, because again, as a chair of governor and one at least who's in the council, I understand more, but governors don't actually have any input into this or have had any feedback or any meetings in terms of this. So perhaps, you know, I would ask for a very urgent meeting with school governors who are obviously now having to work hard to balance the funding shortfalls within their budgets, particularly when 0.5% hasn't been passed on from Welsh Government. And obviously, I understand all the good things that we're doing in terms of the list that's on the page within the appendix, but we're talking about schools here. We're not talking about the package of support around schools. But thanks for your answers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your input. Thank you. Councillor Ronnie Hughes, sorry to keep you waiting. Please go ahead.
It's all right, Chair. No political alliance with me. And I can vote any way I want. And it's good to vote today because I don't get that opportunity only in full council. Can I just pick up a few points here? We are really playing around with this today. You know, we're all giving Andrew the accolades. This is a man I worked with for years and I trust him. He has worked his socks off to get to this stage with the budgets. If you think it could be lower or higher, he would tell you. You know, don't pat him on the back with one thing and then start saying, oh, we can do this, that, and the other. And the whole issue, nobody's mentioned, there's a time scale for this budget. And everybody knows if you've got an alternative budget, you should have done it through the process, not today. There was opportunities for people with their ideas, not saying the ideas that go through. But, you know, we're playing around. We're playing around. And I just feel, you know, you patted him on the back. Do you think if he could got a better deal, he would have done it? He would have. He has absolutely been straight with me all the way along while I've been a councillor in this authority. And we're talking about issues coming. The biggest issue is going to be the mental health of everybody. That's what we should be concentrating on, to see if we can get extra funding from central governments and local, from the Assembly for the mental health issues. Ewan's already said everybody's working their socks off here, and it will tell at the end. But we should be gathering together and lobbying everybody for extra funding. But for goodness sake, councillors, you've had the opportunity before today. If you vote the budget down, where do you go? That's what I'd like to ask the question. What's your alternative and where do we go? Because you're still on a time scale to set the budgets, because we've got to send the bills out. You haven't mentioned that, Leader, but there is a time scale in all this. You know, I asked Andrew years ago, can we suspend it? No, we've still got to follow it through. So all this talk that we're having, all this, that, and the other, why didn't we have this in finance? Why didn't we have any alternatives coming from finance or any of the other committees to this council today with something different? We're all playing games. And it's a silly time to play games. Not this time. I played games in the years. Yeah, I'll admit to it. But again, we were never in this situation. And I say, look, the Treasurer has gone and said what it is, believe him. And that's how I will leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Rodney Hughes. Don't be surprised if you get a few membership from coming through to your door. So, Councillor Frank Bradford next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for your patience. Some of the things I'm saying has already been said already, but in page 104, it's supposed that the authority engaged a consultation with 12 institutions, groups, or organisations. And if Anne is making a proposal that we should engage with residents, I would second that proposal, because it's all about residents. At the beginning, I see people shaking their heads, but they've had their say, and I was courteous to them. I started off with the citizens' advice. They're overwhelmed with unemployment, growth in unemployment inquiries. They're overwhelmed with benefit applications, the debt, loans, paying back loans, and also trying to pay mortgages. Now, like Gareth says, 2.95, and I appreciate all the work that went into that. I honestly do. 2.95 to me is a modest increase. Yes, because I can afford the 2.95. But it's these walls that's been asked to pay the council tax, where it's the income coming into these walls that should be asked to pay, because some people can't afford to have an increase in income tax. Look at the facts. You want facts. Food banks, out of control. Furloughs. Your playgroup, you mentioned playgroups, they're all there with their children because they haven't got jobs, they're in furlough. Mental health, and I'm glad Roddy mentioned mental health, because there's an increase in mental health. And we have the council reduction scheme. And it's a good job we have the council reduction scheme. But that is growing every year. Chair, I'm sorry, but I've got to vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Gareth-Jones, do you want to quickly come in? You got your hands up again. Councillor Gareth-Jones, did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Now that I've had the heavy mob on me, I appreciate, that all the points that are being made, we need to come up with an alternative. Of the fact is, there has been hardly any consultation with us ordinary members. And to say that I want to deprive schools of £2 million, let's say, to what extent and who's being deprived of the money that we are spending on Mochtre, on that debacle? I'm sure that is amounting to hundreds of thousands. What about this Port Areas? Why can't we change how we organise and run Venue Cymru? That's another £1 million. If that could become a social enterprise, there are many, many issues. I could come back, and the list is endless. So don't tell me that I am here to deprive schools or social services. In fact, the very opposite. And just for a reminder, the commercial park, Mochtre Commercial Park, has not come before full council. And in fact, that tells you something. So there are issues here, Ronnie, certainly, and all of the councillors who think, we're in this situation on an annual basis. But the deprivation out there, as Councillor Frank has said, is enormous. And times are different. You quote the middle, £40 per annum, it's nothing. But it's more than that if it's £40 on £40 elsewhere. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Our last speaker, Councillor James Listed, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and thank you for allowing me to speak this morning. I would like to echo Councillor Brian Cossey and Councillor Ronnie Hughes' thoughts this morning. We are not in dreamland. This is a fair budget, and I can't thank Councillor Sam and Andrew Kirkham for all their hard work, and along with the managers and senior leadership team of Conway. This is a huge effort, and I'm pleased and proud to support this budget today of 2.95%. And I'm pleased that it's probably one of, I'm pretty sure it is, the lowest increase in the whole of Wales, which is fantastic. And we should be all very proud of this. We need to get off the playground and vote for this and accept it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor James. You're the last speaker. Thank you. We will, but I am obliged to take the amended version first, which was proposed by Councillor Gareth-Jones and seconded by Councillor Chris Hughes.
Can Councillor Gareth-Jones please confirm the proposal?
Councillor Gareth.
Yeah, the proposal is that we do not impose this heavy burden of 2.95% on our hard-pressed council taxpayers.
So in other words, you proposing freeze to the council tax?
Indeed. As many others are above me, if I may say so, and remind our fellow independents and Conservatives and Labour members
and that's been supported by Councillor Chris Hughes. So, Sally, please, for last time.
I think Ewan Davis wants to come in.
Okay, sorry, I haven't seen that. Yes, Councillor Ewan Davis. Sorry, our chief. Do you want to join our club?
The long meeting is, hasn't it, Chair?
Go on, come in, please.
In terms of the council procedure rules, an amendment can, of course, be made to a recommendation. But it seems to me that the proposed amendment is simply to negate the resolution, and the approach should simply be to go should be for those members to vote against what's proposed. I think you'll end up with the same position, but with one less vote.
So your advice is we go for the recommendation, and the amendment was made. Whoever made the amendment can vote against it.
That's my advice. Yes.
Okay. So
could I come back on that? Yeah. Well, that's advice. I mean, what if I were to recommend that we abandon the whole idea of an increase in council tax and advise the chief financial officer to look elsewhere for the 2 million deficit or whatever?
Okay. Okay. I mean, chief executive is right. The result's going to be same, but I'm minded in fairness, just to keep the fairness. I would take the amendments and go on a vote. Sally, we'll do the roll call, please.
Councillor Ronnie Hughes has his hand raised, and also Rhian ap Gareth.
Okay, can I get the monitor? Can I get the monitor officer in, please, first?
Thank you, Chairman. What we need to bear in mind is our legal obligation here. Our legal obligation is to have a balanced budget. By negating an income tax increase without allocating any other funds towards it, we don't know what we're voting for. So exactly. I'm not sure whether the proposal as presently proposed is in order, because we don't have a balanced budget. It is asking for us to find other ways of addressing that. So we have a legal obligation to have a balanced budget. So I'd leave it there, Chair.
And before you go, can I just ask as a monitoring officer, am I in right to take the amendment if I wish to?
My advice would be, Chair, that amendment is not in order because it doesn't provide a balanced budget. For us to consider an amendment, we need to know what the amendment is proposing in terms of inflation.
Well, could I come back again, Chair? Because it's my amendment, and I appreciate the advice. But my amendment could certainly be adjusted in a way that we don't spend the millions of pounds that we are spending on the Commerce Park. It's quite within our right to do so, because the landowners and so on, the landlord, are in breach of their contract, their side of the contract. And that's £2 million. So I am putting an alternative budget in here. And it's just a sham as far as I'm concerned. Fact is, I've made my point and others have made similar points, and I rest by that. And I would want this proposal to go forward, because it's always the same with this council. People referring to this all the time. You know, there's an intervention here by our officers. We are the councillors, we're the elected members, we should be making the decisions. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor,
there are a few hands up, Chair.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting late. I'm sorry, colleagues, it is getting late, but if you just want to quickly come in, Councillor Ronnie Hughes and Councillor Harry Saville, please.
Chair, the monitoring officer explained it all. And I make this plea to Gareth and his group. Where have you been? Why wait till now? We've still got to set the budget. It's absolutely ridiculous, this situation. You know, people will agree they don't want to put the percentage up. But can I just say to you, Chair, you know, maybe I'd be the first as well. The Zoom meeting, you know, the rules of full council apply in a Zoom meeting. there are people jumping up and down. Once you're supposed to speak in the full council, not 3 times, 4 times. It's getting out of hand. The quicker we get back to the chamber, the better. But I just want to make a point of order, Chair. Where were these with the alternative budget when it was in finance? Just ask yourselves, what you're going to do here? You're going to say no to the budget, then you go to Andrew and say, right, where the 2.5 million, where the 2.5% cuts are going to come from, it means jobs. That's what we'll be doing. Putting jobs down the line when people are desperate for work is absolutely ridiculous.
Councillor Harry, do you want to quickly come in, please?
Yes, thank you.
And that will be the last speakers.
It was just a point of clarification I'm hoping I can have from the monitoring officer. And I'd apologise, I haven't been able to be privy to the entire debate. I had to shoot off briefly. A question I had, my understanding of Gareth's proposal is effectively we bankrupt the authority or we refuse to set a balanced budget. Now, the monitoring officer has said that obviously we have a legal responsibility as a council to set a balanced budget. My understanding was that it was part of the local government code of conduct, and that if we go down this route of attempting to fail to set a balanced budget, we individually have breached the code of conduct and can be disqualified from elected office. I'd appreciate some clarification from that. I think it's important that members are mindful of that. I won't be able to break the law today.
No, we all know it's going to go through, but for clarity's sake, I will bring the monitor officer in.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, there is an obligation under the code to follow advice. However, my advice has been that we need a balanced budget. So if a proposal is brought forward, which explains that the budget which is brought before us is balanced, that would be in order. So from what I understand, the proposal which has been brought by Councillor Gareth Jones is that other funds from other areas of the authority are used to balance the books. I'm not sure whether financially that squares completely with what we have in terms of the budget, to be honest. But I'll ask Andrew to come in on that one.
Mr. Kirker?
Yeah, I mean, you can't, on the day of the council meeting, to set the council tax and the budget, change what has been recommended by Cabinet. You would need to convene a meeting in a timely manner whereby the resolutions that are included in this report would be redrafted, coming to a different outcome, which I guess the alternative is a 0% council tax increase. That would be a meeting probably held sometime next week to give the appropriate notice. The consequences of that action would be that we would probably be at a disadvantage in terms of our billing arrangements. What this could eventually mean is that we may not easily be able to offer the payment of council tax over 12 months because we'd be eating into the time when the first direct debit would be arranged and set up. So you've heard me for 14 years, haven't you, say it's a process, not an event. And the action of turning it into an event has those potentially unintended consequences. And I certainly wouldn't recommend that you do that lightly.
Thank you. Thank you for your valuable contribution. On light of what we have heard from the Chief Executive, from the Monitoring Officer, from Mr. Kirkham, I think if all members heard it loud and clear. So if we go, I'm minded to go to the recommendation now, and then members can make their own mind up whether they want to vote
Gareth
for
Jones
it or
does have his
against it.
hand raised.
Yes,
Chair.
could I come in here? Having listened to my learned friend, and I've made my points absolutely clear, I hope, for future reference. And because of the situation, I don't want to put anybody under any more pressure than they are currently. I understand all the work that's been undertaken, and this is a balanced budget in that sense. But I've made my points known. I hope that I've registered somewhere with my concerns, but on the basis of the smooth running of this authority, then I'm prepared to withdraw my proposal. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Well, much appreciated. Thank you, Councillor Jones. Sally, can we just go to the vote then, please, if you don't mind calling, roll calling.
Yeah, no problem. So again, it's for, against, or abstain. So Councillor Mark Baker.
For.
Councillor Carol Beard.
For.
Councillor Frank Bradfield.
Against.
Councillor Philip Capper.
For.
Councillor Cheryl Carlisle.
For.
Councillor Chris Cater.
For.
Councillor Jeff Corrie.
For.
Councillor Brian Cossey.
For.
Councillor Sam Cotton.
For.
Councillor Mary Doyle.
For.
Councillor Gronwy Edwards.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Keith Eales.
For.
Councillor Louise Emery.
For.
Councillor Philip Evans.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Julie Fallon.
For.
Councillor Pauline Heap-Williams.
For.
Councillor Andrew Hinchliffe.
Abstain.
Councillor Chris Hughes.
Erbyn.
Councillor Ronnie
Against.
Hughes. Councillor
For.
Ronnie, thank you. Councillor Alan Hunter.
For.
Councillor Ian Jenkins.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Gareth Jones.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Thomas Jones.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Wyn Ellis Jones.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Abdul Khan.
I'll abstain.
Councillor Emma Leighton Jones.
For.
Councillor Peter Lewis.
For.
Councillor Tristan Lewis.
Yn erbyn.
Against.
Councillor Ivor Lloyd.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Garfield Lewis.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Sue Lloyd Williams.
Abstain.
Councillor James Listed.
Obliged.
Councillor Anne
For.
McCaffrey.
Against.
Councillor Charlie McCoubry.
For.
Councillor Don Milne.
Against.
Councillor Roger Parry.
For.
Councillor Dave Rees.
For.
Councillor Greg Robbins.
For.
Councillor Austin Roberts.
Ymattal.
Abstain.
Dave Roberts. For, thank you. Councillor Liz Roberts.
For.
Councillor John Roberts.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Sam Rowlands.
For.
Councillor Harry Saville.
For.
Councillor Sue Shotter.
Blyde.
For.
Councillor Michael Smith.
For.
Councillor Nigel Smith.
Obliged.
For.
Councillor Bob Squire.
For personal reasons, against.
Councillor Trevor Stott.
For.
Councillor Adrian Tansley.
Abstain.
Councillor Joan Vaughan.
For.
Councillor Andrew Wood.
For.
And Councillor Aaron Wynne.
Ymattal.
Abstain.
Okay, if you just bear with me a second, Chair, I'll count up the
Sure.
numbers.
Well, Sally is counting the numbers. Can I just remind members, I did promise in the beginning that if any members or officers wish to pay tribute to Mr. Kirkham, please do raise hand now.
Yeah, so I have the numbers, Chair. So it's 6 abstained, 9 against, and 38 for.
So it's carried. Thank you. And thank you, Councillor Sam. And we have now got Councillor Brian Cossey that want to speak. I take it
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to say a few words about Andrew, but as he will be at the special meeting later in the month, I'll save it until then.
Then,
apart from which I'm hungry.
Okay, and that's understandable. And can I thank everyone, especially Shan and Hart teams here for persevering. And yes, it's been a long meeting, but that's, we're lucky to have a democratic debate and speak our mind. And thank you for your patience. And have a good afternoon. And hopefully it's not a late lunch for some. Yeah. Thank you all. Take care.
Well done, Andrew. Well chaired.
All the best.
Thank you, leader. Thank you, everyone.
So what happened and how's it going to be remedied, Kevin? Just give you my own voice reading out of